Good evening, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen in the gallery, and those who may be, thank you councillors, may be watching online. Welcome to our agenda forum. Agenda forums are specifically for agenda items which are to be considered by the council at the next ordinary meeting of council. Agenda forums are not a decision-making forum. They provide an opportunity for councillors to be equally informed and seek additional information on matters prior to the presentation of such matters to the next ordinary meeting of council for formal consideration and decision. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed. The recording will also be archived and made available on the council's website after the meeting. If you choose to participate in the meeting during public question time and deputation time, it is assumed that your consent is given for the audio to be recorded. Please keep your comments respectful to the council and other members of the community. Visual images of the public will not be captured. Attendance's apologies. I have Councillor Podovnik and Councillor McNamara. Any others, Mr CEO?
Mr Mayor, I think we have Councillor Jones as an apology, and Councillor McCulloch, I believe, is here but just not in the chambers at the moment.
Thank you. Any other apologies? None. Declaration of financial and proximity interest and interest affecting impartiality. Mr CEO.
Mr Mayor, we have three declarations this evening. The first one is from Councillor Congerton. It's in relation to item C3.2, which is the SAT Artificial Insemination Centre. It's an interest of impartiality as the Burgess Group has acted as a consultant on a previous development for me. Also have a declaration of interest from Councillor Bailey, the Mayor, and it's also in relation to item C3.2, the SAT reconsideration for the Artificial Insemination Centre. It's a financial one, as Westport is a customer of my business. And myself as a CEO, I have a financial interest in item C3.8, the Chief Executive Officer Performance Review, as I am the incumbent of the position.
Councillor Coley, you have one also?
Fill it in now, but I believe 5.3 is possible interest there, impartiality on Guildford parking changes to time restrictions. And that's all for the moment. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Catalano, you are next.
Yes, I've got one about the heritage reports, Midland Heritage Reports, and that's because I'm a member of Midland Society. I believe we've made some submissions on this.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McCulloch.
And an interest in C3.2, which I'll get to soon.
Which would be a financial as well. Any other declarations, councillors or staff? Be none. That takes us down to public question time and questions relating to reports contained on the agenda. 5.1, questions for which due notice has been given. I have nil. 5.2 is questions without notice. Anyone in the gallery wishing to ask a question relating to item on the agenda? No, thank you. Reports and motions which previous notice has been given. Deputations. In accordance with procedures of public participation at agenda forums, all requests for in-person deputations and submissions of written deputations are required by 3 p.m. Tuesday, August 17. All written deputations received by 5 p.m. Tuesday, August 17 were circulated with the preliminary agenda for tonight's meeting. Takes us now to deputations, and the first one is 13.10, which is the draft desktop heritage assessment for properties nominated in 2020. And our first, we have a written deputation there from the Midland Society. There are no in-persons. Next item is 1311. It's an Overwitz driveway at lot 139, number 12, Grampians Avenue, Janebrook. And we have Mr. Justin Smith, the owner, in support of the application against the recommendation. So thanks, Mr. Smith. You've got 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just coming to the mayor about the driveway, I guess. There's been a few other driveways in our area as well that have got overwidth driveways, which I've got photos of. I wanted a third car driveway, that way I can park and reverse my trailer in and out of the garage, I guess, without causing any issues. I really don't know what much to say. I had Jamie Hogan come out from the Shire. He said from his point of view he doesn't see anything wrong with the driveway being at 9 metres, as long as I stay in with the water meters, measurements and everything is okay, and he reckons it's no issues. Having the driveway at 6 metres and having that bit of grass is an eyesore, because every time I'm reversing and driving over it, that's going to become dead grass and probably become a safety hazard if someone trips over it. That's really it I've got to say.
Okay. Questions, Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you tell us why you need 3 vehicles?
I need the third car garage driveway so I can reverse my trailer into the garage.
All right. So is the need for 3 vehicles, is one of them a work vehicle?
So I got my vehicle, my partner's vehicle, none of them are work vehicles. Mine can be at times, but the trailer is for work and out of weekend use. Yeah.
All right. So the trailer is necessary for your work, and you need the over-width driveway in order to accommodate the trailer and the 3 vehicles.
Yeah. Otherwise, having that detour in the driveway is going to cause it hard to reverse in and out, and it's going to cause problems. And then having that patch of grass is going to either be dead, or there's going to be caused dips in the grass and someone could trip.
Yeah, and if I may ask, what do you do for a living?
I'm a commercial plumber.
A plumber, okay. Okay, so it's needed for trade reasons.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for coming in.
No worries, thanks.
And I just noticed you had some photos
Yes,
there. Would
these
you
are
like
of-
me to pass those around to
Yeah.
all councillors?
Of other drivers, I did a quick drive and I found 7 within 2 streets of overwidth driveways.
Sorry. Do you know the dimensions of these driveways that you have photos
They're
of?
definitely over 6 metres. Some of them are about 9 because they're the same width as my garages, my garage, which is 9 metres, and they're roughly about the same size.
And are they in the same street as you?
Street behind and next street down.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to pass those around.
Councillor Lucas.
Thank you. Can you just confirm, I'm looking at the photos and reading the report, but your driveway's built to put 3 vehicles in it? Your garage, it's a triple...
Yeah, my garage is a triple drive. Yeah, my garage is a triple, yes.
Thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
Next, councillors, we move on to 1312, which is a Marshall Road duplication, Beachborough Road North End, Drumpellier Drive, and Mr. Ben Doyle from Planning Solutions in support of the recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Doyle, and you know the drill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ben Doyle, Planning Solutions. Here on behalf of the Potters House, which is the owner and occupier of lot 1103 Marshall Road, which has access to Marshall Road there. I'd like to thank Councillor Kiley, Councillor Congerton, the Mayor and Councillor Henderson for facilitating and attending the meeting with the City's officers in relation to this road design. I confirm that the Potters House supports the officer recommendation before you tonight. Specifically, we support the review of the pre-deflections to Marshall Road. We support the arranging of a meeting with MRWA and Metronet to discuss the design to facilitate access for landowners. And we support, in principle, access to our neighbour at lot 1102, subject to that access not impeding the existing access to the Potters House, which you can see as the top left property on the first drawing in your attachments there. We look forward to working with the City's officers and councillors to get the best outcome for the local community on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. Any questions, councillors? No. Thank you, Mr. Doyle. Councillors, now move to Part B, and 4.1 is the consideration of submissions for Amendment 132 to the Local Planning Scheme number 17 to modify the boundaries and scheme provisions of the Western Swamp Tortoise Special Use Zone 7. And you've received, councillors, a written deputation from Mr. Steve Dobson, and Mr. Dobson is here to do an in-person on behalf of Mr. Graham White, who's a landowner. Thank you, Mr. Dobson. You've got 5 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Graham and Christine White live on the western side of the Ellenbrook Reserve, just in Upper Swan there. They've been there for 40 years, and they've been unable to subdivide due to the perceived threat to the adjacent Western Swamp Tortoise Reserve. The Whites have lost a son through an ailment which could have, they maintain, otherwise have been treatable in the USA. If given approval for subdivision, they would have used those funds. The adjacent reserve has also had a fire regime. It's supposed to have an 8-year burn cycle, which has never been observed as occurring. Consequently, the Whites have experienced 3 fires, endangering their family home and property. I've heard a number, excuse me, I've heard a number of these harrowing outcomes for families, and it gets to me. And the submission before you, Amendment 132, has been with the city now for 6 years. It was submitted in 2015. So we're calling on Council at next week's meeting to not delay, not to entertain comments or other motions or assessments other than our requested modifications, which I've put in writing and sent through to you. So I'm here this evening to answer any questions that you may have regarding those modifications.
Thank you, Mr Dobson. Questions, councillors? Councillor Catalano, I think you were first.
Which part of the land that is going to be included in this scheme amendment do the Whites actually own? Because there's quite a few lots there.
I think you might be referring to the general rural land which surrounds the special use, which would otherwise be known as Precinct 1 or C on your maps. Is that the land you're referring to? That's currently zoned as general rural, and I can confirm that is the Whites' property in that zoning.
Okay. Precinct 1 it's called, is it?
Yes, Precinct 1 or otherwise C.
Do you have an address for them? It's in the submission,
It's
isn't it?
on Alexia Avenue. It's right down the end. There's 2 homes on the property. There's only their properties on that road.
Okay, so you said it was east. Did you say it was east of the?
Just west of the habitat.
West of and which particular of those 2? Because there's 2 swamps.
That's right. Yeah.
It's the top swamp, or the northern one, or
it's the one in the south.
In the south.
Yep,
and they're just
to the west of that.
West of it. Okay.
Immediately adjacent to the
great.
west.
That's the one. Okay, that was what I wanted to know at this moment.
Yep,
Thanks.
no worries.
Tar.
Councillor Catalano. Councillor Coley.
Thank you, Mayor. Just in relation to the property that you mentioned, what was the zoning of it when the people purchased it?
A general rule, and it still is general rule.
Was it in a protection zone at the time of when they purchased it?
No, the protection came in I think it was there's been a number of EPPs, environmental protection policies for the habitats, but there has been no planning instrument which has affected the surrounding land until, there hasn't been, and there still isn't. But this Amendment 132 will capture their property within this amendment, and it will facilitate subdivision for their property as well as for others.
Question to staff, just looking for confirmation on when the protection zone came into place.
Mr Russell.
Through Mr Mayor, the EPA has been pursuing the implementation through our scheme of the environmental protection policy for some 10 years. And this exercise, which this amendment is the culmination, has been going for at least 6.
Okay. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Yeah, Mr Dobson, I'm just trying to establish exactly which area is going to be omitted. So It says here on page 95 of the agenda, it says omit lot 42, number 23, Apple Street. Is that the property we're talking about?
No, those omittances are relating to the clay extraction facilities along Apple Street, which Councillor Congerton requested at the last meeting on behalf of the clay excavation.
Which, and so exactly which area on this map are you wanting to have omitted?
I'm not requesting an omittance at all. All I'm doing is I'm raising the council's attention to the plight of the landowner immediately adjacent to this particular habitat, and stating that this amendment 132 really needs to be reconciled next week.
So on the maps we've got here, we cannot see the area that you want to have omitted.
I'm not asking for any land to be omitted, councillor.
So what are you asking for?
I'm asking for the amendment to include modifications as I've written them on my written deputation for your reading last evening. Which are, as I'll quote them, Precinct 1C, allow 8 hectare lots to reduce to 2 hectare lots where a hydrological assessment is favourable and where the landowner has contributed towards an approved planning contribution plan. Precinct 2D, allow for limited reduction of 2 hectare lots to 1 hectare lots where land capabilities will allow and where the landowner has contributed towards an approved planning contribution plan. So these are modifications to the proposed wording of the amendment which we are seeking.
Yeah, so I guess what we're looking for, Alice, what I'm looking for is a map that shows me that, because I don't know the significance of that change.
Well, the precincts should be marked on your maps there as Precinct 1 or Precinct C.
Page number 297.
And Precinct 2, or otherwise known as D. The EPA referred to them in letters, and the city's referring to them in numbers.
The blue and the green. So the blue and the green is Precinct 1, Precinct 2.
Yep.
So can you just clarify that now we're understanding we're talking about quite large areas. What is it that you would like?
Well, we'd like some further development of higher densities throughout both of these areas to facilitate provision of a structure plan and management plans.
Right. So how is that going to impact the Western Swamp tortoise if it's going to be high density?
These are very general questions that you're asking for me to go into, Councillor.
But they're specific to the motion we're putting. So you're asking for something, and I'm trying to understand what the impact would be.
Okay.
If you describe it in words, then I'm unable to understand the scale and the area of the impact. Now I'm seeing it on here. I think it's quite a big area. So it may have a large area on what looks like at least 50% of the area.
That's correct, yep.
Okay, yeah. So in which case, we might end up with 50% less Western Swamp tortoises.
No, not at all. No, that's a conjecture. That's totally incorrect. What the existing wording is for Precinct 1C is there is a water catchment area, and they're concerned about the water quality, its quantity, in preserving that for the benefit of the tortoise. Now, there's 2 catchments. There's one to the west of the Twin Swamps Reserve, that's to the north, and there's another catchment just to the west of the southern Upper Swan Reserve. Now, they are preserved, and the EPA are saying they are high conservation areas. But there is a lot of land that you can see on your maps which surround those particular water catchment areas that could potentially be subdividable down further. And the EPA have stated that in their recommendations, and the council officers have reiterated that in their wording within the present amendment. But it's worded in such a way as to say you must undertake a hydrological study to ensure that there is no impact to the tortoises prior to the lot sizes coming down from, in this case, 8 hectares to down to potentially 2 hectares. Okay, that provision's already there in place in this amendment as it's being proposed. So we're not looking to change that. All we're trying to do is to say, look, these structure plans and all these management plans that you're requesting are going to cost a lot of money. And no one individual landowner, including myself, is going to stump up the money to do all of that work in order to ensure that all these benefits that we've been working so hard for the past 10 years is actually going to materialise in a structure plan and subdivision for the benefit of the tortoises and the landowners. So what we're trying to do here is to seek some modifications to the present wording to allow some structure plan contribution plans, as it were, similar to like you have in your infrastructure development contribution plan. So it's a similar concept, but I appreciate it may not have been done previously.
Councillors, what I might do, there's probably reasonably complicated items, so at the end of the deputations I might ask Mr Russell to give us a 15-minute presentation on the ins and outs of that so we can clarify that. Any further questions of Mr Dobson, councillors? Thanks, Mr Dobson.
Thank you.
Now we go to item 4.3, the proposed amendment number 204 to Local Planning Scheme 17, Bellevue Precinct 6, General Commercial to Residential R20, R40, the Bellevue East Land Use Strategy. And the first speaker is Mr Tom Pollich from the Vintage Automobile Association. Thank you, Mr Pollich.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors. I've been authorised by my association to represent their views on this proposal. In principle, the Executive Committee are in agreement of what is happening, but as all not-for-profit organisations, we're always very wary of our costs, and we're hoping that this doesn't upset our current costs in maintaining that property through council rates and other levies that might be applied. Just as a background, our organisation will be 50 years old next year. We have some 255 members. We're like a men's shed organisation. We provide recreational facilities for people in the over 70s group, and they're all very keen on not manufacturing, but restoring old cars. And it's a free service for all our members. And we have opening hours of Wednesdays between 9 and 1 and Saturday mornings between 9 and 1. So we don't sort of interfere with our near neighbours in any way. We have meetings once a month for general members, and they're usually finished by 9:30. So I'd like to ask for the record to be noted that we are concerned that any increase in costs would affect our operation, but we do favour the proposal because we think that area is very well suited for residential.
Thank you, Mr Pollich. Councillor Johnston, you got a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, just thank Mr Pollich for your deputation, and yeah, it's an excellent organisation. I've been there a couple of times myself to see what's going on. It's great. Mr Mayor, my question actually is just to get an answer to Mr Pollich's question from the staff, and I guess that question is this going to change the rates on the premises? Are the rates going to go up or stay the same or change in some way?
Ms Lay, I guess you're the rates expert.
Mr Mayor, if I understand, this proposal is to change from general commercial to residential. It will require Landgate to provide updated valuations, so at this stage we can't anticipate what that change would be.
Thank you.
I guess the question is it likely to go up or likely to go down? It's just speculation.
Speculation. Yeah.
Okay,
Well, it's perhaps something, Mr Mayor, that we can pursue in the future if this amendment gets passed next week.
Thank you. Any further questions to Mr Pollich? Thank you, Mr Pollich.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Next speaker on this item is Mr Mark Richards, the Chair of the Bellevue Residents and Ratepayers Association.
Mr Mayor, councillors and staff, if I could combine the two items, I won't take up any more of your time, but with regards to this item and also item the proposed amendment number 205 to local planning scheme, number 17, the removal of additional use, 73. Both the proposed amendments are in precinct 6, which has been identified as the central residential precinct. As outlined in your brief, the Bellevue Land Use Study was adopted in August 2013 and was developed in response to community concerns intended to bring the land uses in line with other land uses in that precinct to prevent the opportunity of conflicting uses. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions of Mr Richards? Councillor Coley.
Just for the record, Mark, I just assume you're in support of both
items?
items?
I'm definitely in support.
And that's the feeling of the Bellevue residents and ratepayers?
Well, it's the feeling of the Bellevue residents and ratepayers and the whole community that have contributed to putting this document together, the Bellevue East Land Use Study.
Councillor Johnson.
Question, Mr Mayor. My question is based upon the concern not to destabilise the Vintage Automobile Association, if that's the name. So the purpose of this is just to rezone these two. If we look at page 363, we've got these two blue areas here. They're going to be rezoned to R20/40.
Mr Russell.
Sorry, Mr Mayor. Yes, the amendment's going from general commercial to residential in both instances.
Right.
Well, in the instance of the first one, in the instance of the second one, of course, it's going from private clubs and institutions. I beg your pardon, the second one's actually removing the additional use. So the first one that we're referring to, yes, it's general commercial to residential.
So I'm not completely clear. See the first one, the second one. On page 363, there are two areas defined. Is it the left-hand side one or the right-hand side? Which one are we talking about?
Sorry, Mr Mayor, we're looking at page 363.
363, yeah.
363, yeah. The way the scheme amendments work out, it shows you the top page, shows you the existing zoning, and then the next diagram down there simply shows the nature of the zoning of the land that is changing, which is what you see on the second. So it's existing to proposed.
So the Vintage Automobile Associations is the right hand of those two rectangles there, I believe.
Well, it would be east of the. So you've got two properties on the western side. So I'm also a member of the Vintage Car Club, and I'm like I wouldn't be proposing or putting this motion forward if I didn't think it was going to hinder the Vintage Car Club. And as far as I'm understanding, the Vintage Car Club can still operate as it is, and until such time as they either cease to exist on that property or sell the property, nothing will change. But they're on the eastern side, so that would be the eastern block there.
Eastern block.
Yep.
So there's a concern that making this change could potentially destabilise the club if it causes a great increase in rates.
Well, going from general commercial to residential, I would think that... what do you think?
I don't know.
I think it'll reduce.
Let's hope so.
Councillor Scanlon, you got a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you it's to staff. And I'd just like to ask you if the City of Swan has the capacity to alter the rates once Landgate has revalued the properties. So I want to know if we can change the amount we're charging individual organisations in the rates.
Ms Lay.
Through you, Mr Mayor. When Landgate provide the valuations, the city then applies a differential rate type and a particular rate in the dollar to that valuation. I'm not aware of what the current rate type is for this property. I don't have that information to hand, but there's a particular rate in the dollar applied. Could make an assumption that it is the residential rate in the dollar that's applied to this property, and on that basis I wouldn't expect the landgate valuation to change. However, if a commercial rate in the dollar is applied, we would have to see the impact of this and whether a new valuation gets applied.
And thank you, Ms Lay. And sorry, furthermore, if it is greater than their current rate, we don't have any power to reduce that, do we?
Through you, Mr Mayor, no, that would need to be consistent with the city's rating methodology, which is the rate in the dollar times the valuation.
Thank you.
Councillor John, do you got another question?
The question, yeah, through you, Mr Mayor, to Mr Pollich. I wonder if Mr Pollich could let us know what rating is applied to the premises. You don't need to tell us now, you can take it on notice.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, we're charged at the commercial rate.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Calano.
To staff, I don't, from the report, I don't understand why it's just these two properties that have come up for basically rezoning at this time. Why is that?
Mr Russell.
Through Mr Mayor, well, we've got a program of recommendations that were installed in the ballast study when the council adopted it. So, you know, we're taking these two discrete amendments that are being done. It's often the case that rather than do a wholesale amendment that might present various issues for various properties, that you keep the amendments discrete so that if you've got too many properties subject to an amendment, you get an issue with one or two in the planning system with an amendment, and that can hold up the rest. So it's quite frequent where we do these things in, I won't use the term bite-sized parcels, but discrete parcels that enable efficient processing.
First to that, so what actually triggered these two properties coming up for the rezoning? I just want to know specifically for these two properties why it's triggered
Mr Russell.
the rezoning.
Through Mr Mayor, simply because, as I said, it's part of a program. Look, as far as my understanding is that there has been a persistent and understandably persistent desire of the Bellevue community and the Ratepayers Association for the City of Swan to crack on and implement ballast. So, in light of that, Mr Mayor, we're heeding the desires of our community and cracking on with these amendments.
Yeah, I haven't got a problem with that, but I just want to understand why these two properties as opposed to another two properties. You know, I'd just like to know the rationale behind these two properties. What triggers? I mean, I understand that Bellevue community want it, and
I could perhaps answer that if you
yeah,
like. Well,
great. Thank you.
They're the only ones in precinct 6 that come under general commercial. They're the only ones in precinct 6 that come under general commercial. We've got bigger problems east because they're general industrial, but these three properties come under general commercial, not general industrial. So there is, as Phil Russell just outlined, it's a lot easier just to change these.
And the other thing is that the current use, I see there's a shop and we've got the Vintage Car Club. So is the shop they're still operating the shop out of those two, the first two premises?
Well, you've got a resident,
east?
part of it's been changed into a residence. You've got someone living in the property and part of it is the art gallery. But as I outlined before, while that business is still operating as a going concern, I believe they're still able to proceed and still be able to operate as that business until such time as they cease to exist or sell the property.
So can I just have that confirmed by Mr Russell, that basically what it means is that the current use is permitted until... I just would like to know how this
Mr.
process
Russell?
works in this.
It's in the report.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you. Yep. Where you have land that is rezoned, so take for instance the land that's zoned general commercial, and if that land is being lawfully used for a type of use that the general commercial zoning allows, and you rezone it to residential, and the residential zoning does not permit that existing use, then the operation of that property has what we call in planning terms a non-conforming use right. And our scheme sets out the parameters of the application of non-conforming use rights. And it says effectively one of the limitations is if that use is discontinued for a period greater than 6 months, then the council can deem it that use, non-conforming use, has expired or been extinguished. So what it means, for example, any operation of the commercial zoned land that's lawful at the moment and is occurring, if this amendment ultimately was to go through, then those uses would still be lawfully permitted to continue their operation, and even further, the scheme would allow them, within rationale, to expand those non-conforming uses, or the extent of the site used for the non-conforming use. The scheme also allows for what we call a change in non-conforming use from one to another. But the test around that is that the non-conforming use that you're changing to from the existing one must be closer to the purpose and intent of the zone. So those are long-standing scheme mechanisms in all local planning schemes in Western Australia that relate to non-conforming uses, and that's right. The person that enjoys that use is allowed to continue to enjoy that use unless it's extinguished by cessation of use, or unless the council makes arrangements to purchase and pay out the landowner to cease that use, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Russell. That would be the longest yes I've ever heard. And you'll find that on page 359 of your report, Councillor Catalano. Any further questions? Thank you, Mr Richards.
Thank you.
Now that leapfrogs us over to 4.5, which is the Development Contribution Plan. Proposed amendment number 200 for Local Planning Scheme number 17 to establish and insert a Development Contribution Plan for Development Contribution Area number 8, Henley Brook Urban Precinct, and Mr Tony Alkavoski from Mirvac, not speaking but happy to take any questions. We have, you've received, councillors, a written deputation from someone by the name of Mark, which you've received. Are there any questions for Mr Alkavoski, councillors? Councillor Kiley. Mr Alkavoski, are you with us?
Yes, he is.
If you'd just like to... Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I purely decided to attend tonight just as a mere observer, but if there are some questions, is happy to take them on board as we are currently developing land within the Henley Brook precinct.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
I'm just interested in the discussions where $25 million of DCP funds has been taken out. Under the report, it talks about the refinement. It's referring to the reduction in infrastructure in the area as refinement. I'm wondering if this is a euphemism for cheapening down the area. I'm just interested in what sort of refinements we're looking at, and I don't know whether it's a staff answer or...
I really can't comment on the work. My understanding is this is internal workings by the City of Swan, and
It's just
Mr Russell's indicated he can comment on that.
It just said it referred to discussions with Mirvac and landholders.
Mr Russell?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'll be a bit short with this one. In essence, it's not taking out infrastructure. It's simply, and you've got to remember, these are cost estimates. So what we're doing is we've had cause to actually more refine the cost estimates as we prepare more detail with the infrastructure designs for these DCPs and work out the parameters. So that just means as a case of going back and revising in more detail, we've actually estimated that the cost should reduce.
Just further to that, is it reduction in cost, or is it expanding the number of lots potentially available by potentially narrowing the roads, for example, throughout the subdivision?
Mr Russell?
Through you, Mr Mayor, no, assuredly it's not about increasing the number of lots or reducing the number of lots. It's merely, and it's not even changing the specifications, it's just refining the specifications more accurately.
I'd be very interested to know what those refinements would be, if you could give me one or two examples.
Mr Russell?
Through you, Mr Mayor, a lot of those things, when we're talking about road infrastructure, okay, commonly when we start off with designs, we might start off, and Council, you know it very well, Mr Caton refers to things such as 15% designs, and then we build up and refine those or expand the detail, and you get to 85% and therein. So are initial estimates, and you've got to remember with this DCP, we were under inordinate pressure with our lovely planning system here in Western Australia and our natural and understandable desire to roll out land, such as Mr Alakowski's company is doing. We were under the pump, Mr Mayor, to produce a development contribution plan amendment in double time. So, of course, we start off with all of that, and our engineers are working off broad specifications with designs. And commonly it's around roads, and it might be investigating, details you've heard many times, such as service relocations, where we get a better understanding of what the disposition of services might be, and then what those costs might be. It might be around working out the detailed design around the roads to more than simply just length and breadth and things like that. So it's the nature of really technical specifications that as you refine those designs and get more of those designs worked up, you're able to get more accurate costs.
Thank you, Mr Russell.
Just further, thank you, Mr Russell. In relation to the water, does the DCP cover the cost of any re-injection of water into the aquifer in the area? Does it go over that area at all? I mean, or in other words, how are we looking at providing water to the parks and ovals in the area?
I can answer that.
Alex? Tony?
Oh, look, I'm happy to answer that. I mean, my understanding is through the whole structural planning process that consultation between the proponent of the structure plan and the Department of Water, the licences that are currently within the Henley Brook structure plan area can only be used within that Henley Brook structure plan area, i.e. they can't be transferred to other parts of the area. So the amount of water licences and the capabilities they have to extract amount of water is certainly more than sufficient to irrigate the public open space in the structure plan area. We have, Mirvac actually purchased some licences from some landowners to ensure that we have enough water allocation to irrigate the public open spaces that we are constructing and contributing. But overall, the whole area has sufficient water to irrigate the public open space within the structure plan area. It can only be used in that area. It can't be transferred anywhere else.
Thank you. Any other questions of Councillor Henderson?
Thank you. There's considerable concern from landowners that the cost of the DCP is getting to a point where they feel it might be unviable. Could you comment on whether or not you think that some aspects of the DCP are over and above what might be needed, or do you think it's how it should be?
Look, I think to Phil Russell's point of view, it's an extremely difficult task that the city has to try and implement a DCP over 110 fragmented lots within an area, and now being governed by state planning policy has to do it in a 6-month time frame, which would normally take anywhere from 2 to 3 years. So enormous task on hand. All Mirvac are looking to do in conjunction with the adjoining developers in the area is to try and assist the city to make sure that these costs are what they are. Because you're right, it is making it prohibitive. My understanding is in the area. I am aware of a lot of developers allowing their options to lapse because they simply can't make it work. It doesn't stack up from a development perspective with some of the rates. Now, in saying that, we're not against the development contribution plan. It's vital for the area to ensure that infrastructure is delivered in an orderly and manner, and also in a fair and equitable manner. I mean, for those who are delivering it, they deliver it. For those that aren't, they then have to then obviously contribute to it, because it shouldn't be borne on the city and its ratepayers as such to take on that expense. So no one's against it. It's just we want to make sure that it's actually the right numbers. And to your point, just to probably answer one of your questions, Councillor Kiley, I mean, there's some examples. I'll give you one. There's one where a roundabout's currently just been tendered on the corner of Park and Future Partridge. It's been tendered and it will be constructed at a cost of $330,000. Your DCP had it in there for $1 million. All right. So when you've got a few roundabouts in the area, you then question it. So it's not we are all here to work with the city to ensure that there's no burden left on the city and its ratepayers, and we're all here to work together to make sure we get it right, because it is important. No one's looking to shortchange, cut corners or anything like that. I can certainly assure you of that there.
Thanks for that example.
I think I'm still with Councillor
sorry.
Henderson.
Follow-up question. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
So just to be clear, you don't think it's over-specified or it's fit for purpose?
Look, our initial review today, and we are, I must sort of caveat my comments that we are in constant dialogue with the city with regards to this. And it's not just the planning, it's the engineers, the landscape architects, it's the whole suite that, we are investing out, we're utilising our consultants on our time, on our cost to ensure that this DCP is a fair and equitable DCP, and we're here to assist the city. So in no way, shape or form are we looking to walk away from anything like this. So I believe that we will get to a position where it's probably more fair and equitable, but like I said, as the city as they work through this process, and it's a difficult task that the city are working through at the moment, but as they work through it and we get more refinement around some things and other bits and pieces, I think we'll get the right outcome.
Another question, Councillor?
Through to staff, when do we expect this DCP to come back to council once advertised?
Mr Russell.
One of the most difficult questions, Mr Mayor, that we face here. What I can say is that an item, before we can start advertising with this amendment as a DCP amendment, a complex amendment, we need the consent of the West Australian Planning Commission. I can say, Mr Mayor, that I made a presentation to the Statutory Planning Committee on the city's behalf on Tuesday, where a report was presented to recommend that the Commission give consent to advertise. I fully expect that we'll be notified quite likely by Friday, and then we will move quickly to, I would say, program the 2-month, 60-day advertising period starting the following week. Sometime next week, hopefully. We'll get the documentation prepared up. That will then run for 60 days, and then there's the question of consideration of submissions. Now, I'll caveat this. The Department of Planning staff's recommendation to the Commission has queried the cost apportionment of a number of specified infrastructure items in this amendment. And they more or less suggested that we have a close look and see in relation to who uses these road intersections or treatments between this structure plan area and the broader area. I fully expect, as we did, and Mr Mayor and councillors will recall, we had to go back and have 2 bites of the cherry with the South Bullsbrook and the Bullsbrook town site DCPs, where the Commission wanted us, the Minister wanted us to reapportion the cost contributions of various infrastructure. They have flagged this on this amendment as well, and more or less indicated, so it's conceivable that we could have 2 advertising processes with that. That's up to the department. So the answer to the question, the earliest, Mr Mayor, that we could get this back, I think, in front of the council, we've got 60 days, probably won't be till February of next year for a final decision. But even if we do that, it goes back to the Commission. We can't rule out the fact that the Commission and the Minister might well say, we'll go away and change X, Y and Z and re-advertise it again. And of course that's what's happened with our Bullsbrook town site and industrial DCPs. So the earliest, conceivably, procedurally, would be February of 2022, but I expect, all things being equal, it might be some time after that.
Thanks, Mr Russell. Councillor Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Again, through to staff, I'd just like to ask, we have some concerns from a resident who's written in about the fauna study being inaccurate. I'm wondering if you can please provide councillors with that information of the environmental studies.
Well, councillors were talking about DCP.
Very briefly through, Mr Mayor. Look, I haven't seen this submission. I don't know whether it's something that was provided to councillors, but I would expect what that's referring to is the fauna studies for the Henley Brook structure plan area. The structure plan has, of course, been approved by the Commission. It's gone through the process of coming to us. So you might so around all of that, that's been done. In relation to the amendments that the city is looking at putting into its scheme for future development areas, now they may well come into effect and they might well actually apply to future subdivision areas, but certainly this structure plan has gone through the process and been adopted already, so you wouldn't expect to have any requirements for fauna management arrangements retrofitted to an approved structure plan.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank
Mr
you.
Russell. further questions? Councillor Henderson. Understaff. Any more of Tony? Thanks, Tony. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. Mr Russell, and perhaps Mr Coaten, I wanted to get a bit closer to the specified level and the costs. We heard discussion of $1 million roundabouts down to 300,000 and the like just now. Past DCPs were done at, I think, considerably lower costs. Have we specified this at a level that has brought the cost up to such a level that some are saying it may be unaffordable, and perhaps we need further information about the constraints and the reasons for all of this, and maybe that'll come back after the advertising. But I just feel as though, from what I've heard, and it's been specified perhaps at a level that's unaffordable.
Mr. Coaten.
Standard subdivisional designs are applying to this case, so there's nothing greater or less than that, but probably following on from a little bit as an example of what Mr Russell was talking about in the design, the various iterations of the design. So, it's not based on any detailed design at all. It's based on, a structure plan which is basically a line with maps on it. So issues such as how many street lights do you account for, how often do you have side entry drainage pits. There's been no design done for that. So just to give you an example on, if there was just one road picked, that the difference between having a drainage pit at 30 metres versus 50 metres is, that could be $100,000 difference just on one road just for drainage. Street lighting is another example where how many street lights do you need? Until you do the detailed design, you don't actually know. So a difference between a street light every 30 metres and a street light every 50 metres, and these are examples of the difference in the cost. Again, that has cost differences of, that can easily add up into the millions of dollars in terms of those sort of things. But until you've actually got a design, that detailed design, you don't have that level of detail. So quantity surveyors make assumptions around that sort of thing.
Thanks, Mr Coaten. Councillor Lucas.
Thank you to Mr Russell. If he knows, do we know how many different developers are in this area of the structure plan, Mr Russell?
Through Mr Mayor, look, principally we're liaising with, of course, Mr Alakowski's company Mirvac. There's also Progress Developments on behalf of the Little Group, which is the principal there that we've been dealing with is Mr Chris Lewis. So those are the two. There have been other parties that have been interested, and of course this has been one of the hot land specs in the Perth metro area in the last 6 months. So there's been, and residents have had all sorts of people looking at, I suppose, knocking on their door and looking at making offers. But the only concrete ones that we have been dealing with to date have been the two proponents that have been front and centre as the proponents with the structure plan, and that as I said, has been Mirvac in Progress Developments.
Thank you.
Councillor Kellano.
So I think it's a question, well, I'm not sure who exactly, but page 408, we've got basically a list of items in red, and that total almost 25 million, and I imagine that's what we're talking about. But in terms of this reduction, but I don't understand what these things mean. Community infrastructure construction network. Can you explain what that is? Local transport infrastructure network. What does that mean? Just in terms of what are these specific items? I mean, it's a general statement, but what does it specifically refer to? And then I'm particularly interested in the public open space land and construction network, a reduction there of 1.7 million. So can we just have a little bit of explanation as to what these specifically mean?
Mr Russell, there's a fair bit of that. Do you want to do something at the end of the meeting on that as well?
If you please, Mr Mayor, yes.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. No other questions. Councillors, will move on to 4.7, which is Administrative Tribunal Appeal for Reconsideration Refusal of Short Stay Accommodation at Lot 166, number 149, Caspian Way, Brigadoon. And the first speaker is Ms Karen Jardine. the owner in support of the recommendation. Thank you, Ms Jardine.
Sorry, I'm really not a good public speaker, so I'll do my best. Okay. My husband and I would like your reconsideration on this application for our short stay accommodation in Brigadoon, which we have run from June 2018 to May this year. This application was lodged in March 2019 with the councillors it's been with councillors for nearly 2 years. The planning officer dealing with the application was aware that we were still operating under this period. I have had many phone calls and emails with the planning officer over the 2 years and prepared everything I was asked for the approval. This process started coming to a close 2021 when I received a letter from the compliance officer saying that we had to cease operation of our short stay venture. After receiving this letter, I contacted the new planning officer dealing with the application to work over our next steps. Our application was put before council in April this year. I submitted a detailed management plan, a fire evacuation plan, to the planning officer as part of this application. During the council meeting, we were surprised to hear that the application was denied. We found out after the meeting that it was due to a long list of complaints from one individual that we were not aware of. Many of the complaints listed were false. Complaints noted before the short stay business was in operation, the property was actually vacant. Complaints noted when guests had already checked out, for example, the 4th of June 2018. Complaints noted during the evening when the property was only used during the day, my son's end of Year 6 party on the 12th of December 2020, which was held between the hours of 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. 12 boys attended. The complaint read, loud outdoor music, doof sound, which is extremely annoying at the pool house. Neighbours' dogs barking due to loud music, causing more disturbances. Party was between 2:10 and 11:25 p.m. However, there was no music playing, just kids having fun, playing games in and around the pool area. One of the fathers of the boys who was attending the party has written a letter which denies this complaint. He was chief of police in Toodyay for many years. We have many similar letters from guests and neighbours that have also proved a lot of complaints noted are false or exaggerated. I have always tried to consider the neighbours and don't want to cause an upset in the community. We have many supportive letters from our immediate neighbours. For example, a neighbour who lives within sight of the pool house, only 80 metres away. I have copies of all these letters available if you need. Please note that the individual complaining is one of our furthest immediate neighbours and lives over the road 256 metres away from the pool house, with many mature trees between hers and our property. Prior to being the short stay, we lived in Brigadoon for 10 years. It is a beautiful place. Most people don't know it's there. It's there and it's very close to tourism in the valley. Many guests have noted that it feels like going down south for a small holiday. It is a beautiful place for a short getaway. This year we have put a very strict management plan in place and have had no complaints. We have had a mix of guests over the years and we have learnt what types of groups we really want. Young groups, parties, bucks or hens nights will not be permitted. We would like council to consider a few amendments to our management plan. Guests being allowed to make use of the pool house on summer evenings to 10:30 on Friday and Saturday nights, only between the months of November to March. A small extension to 9:30 or 10 p.m. on the weeknights during school holidays, summer school holidays, as we have a lot of families that stay with their kids. A special exemption for New Year's Eve to 12:30 a.m. These changes will allow guests to enjoy a barbecue and the pool on a hot summer's night. The current 8:30 restriction on the pool house in summer will likely make this venture unviable. I am very aware that we will only be given a 1-year permit to see if I can keep a tight ship, and will make sure we will comply with the rules set by council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Jardine. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Henderson.
Sorry.
Thanks, Karen. You said a special exemption. Did
For
I
New
hear
Year's.
12:30 a.m.?
Pardon?
Did I hear 12:30 a.m.?
Yeah, just because it's New Year's Eve.
Oh, New Year's Eve.
Yes,
it was
that was the only
12:30.
day.
Oh, right, New Year's Eve. Thank you.
Councillor Colley.
Yeah, thanks for the deputation. You said year 6. Did you mean year 12 or year 6?
No, my year 6 kids.
So boys 11, 12.
Yep.
Okay.
So my son does not like music,
And there's only 12 of them.
and there was only 12 kids.
And the complainant was 256 metres away.
Yep.
Okay, just to be clear. And
So
could
the
I-
police officer that was there that day,
Yeah.
he was just one of the dads, but he stayed the whole day because he lives in Chittering and he had to go to Mandurah. So
Okay.
he thought, yeah.
And can I just ask that you email one of the ward councillors those conditions you'd like considered?
Yep, yep.
Um,
Can do that.
Thank you, or all of us.
Yep.
Thank you.
That's fine.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just want to clarify, are you resident on the premises or not
No,
resident?
no. We actually only live 12 minutes down the road though. So we have got one neighbour, well, as I said, that do let us know if there's any issues that happen on the property, as they can see our backyard clearly. And we just come down or contact the people first, but come down if there's anything that we need to deal with. So, yeah.
But you're not actually
We're not on the property,
premises
no.
in control, and I guess you're not always available.
Oh, no, I'm a bit of a homebody, so I'm not normally out anywhere. So, but yeah, I'm not on the property.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, councillors? Thank you, Mr Jardine.
Just to note, I'll be moving an amendment.
Okay. No worries, we're making it. Okay. You can take a seat, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you. To staff, through you, Mayor, the absence of the owner on the property, does that in effect change the conditions of use or the zoning somehow, that it's not really a home, short stay accommodation, yes, but maybe not necessarily a B&B, or just interested in whether that affects anything?
Mr Russell.
Mr Mayor, no, it's not a bed and breakfast, because obviously the persons renting the accommodation aren't staying within the residence and getting breakfast provided to them by the owners, but it is a short stay accommodation.
Thank you. Right. No other questions, council. The next presentation is from Mr Carlo Famiano of CNF Town Planning and Development on behalf of the landowners in support of the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Good evening, councillors and staff. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. Yes, I'm speaking on behalf of the landowner, and we're supportive of the recommendation put forward for approval of the short stay accommodation or reconsideration of this. As we know, this application went through to council back in April. It was refused generally because there was a large list of incidences or complaints at the back of the agenda which outlined the issues with this property. Since that meeting, we've gone through every one of those incidences, and a lot of them, as Karen has pointed out this evening, are not correct, and a number of them don't actually relate to the property itself and don't match up with times and dates and so on and so forth. So I guess at the end of the day, a number of those complaints that have come through from one objector has painted a bad picture for Karen and the short stay accommodation on this property. The property itself is in close proximity to a number of tourist destinations, such as the Swan Valley, Bells Rapids, and a number of walking trails throughout the hills. So it's certainly an ideal place to have a getaway for families within the city or within the state, considering we can't get out of the state to go for a holiday. It's a good location to have a local holiday. The one thing that I wanted to point out, and I think it's been outlined in the report again tonight, is that the objector, and once again it's only one objector, has outlined that there's no short stay accommodations within the area. A quick search, I found just a quick random search, I found 7 within the area, which is including Brigadoon and Baskerville. So it's not uncommon for a short stay accommodation to take place within these areas, given its fantastic location and its beautiful scenery. Since February, Karen has been implementing a new approach to the short stay accommodation on this site. and has implemented a number of different measures from what was happening previously, because she was unaware of the complaints that were being made to the city. Since February, there hasn't been any complaints, and we've cross-checked that with the actual objector, and since February they haven't received any, she hasn't raised any objection. So therefore, the changes in which Karen has done to this property has certainly worked, and has certainly reduced any concerns with the adjoining owners or the objector itself. Karen, as I pointed out earlier on, has spoken to the adjoining owners. They don't have any concerns with this. They certainly haven't identified the issues that were raised in those list of incidences at the back of the agenda, and they certainly don't have an issue with it. We're aware that this approval, if it is granted by council, is only for 1 year, and during that period the council would obviously keep an eye on, or the council staff will keep an eye on its operations and monitor any objections. And if obviously everything runs well, then there would be a new application next year for the council to consider. And during that period, obviously, it's a good test run to see how this management plan operates throughout the period. So just to conclude, we're certainly supportive of the recommendation for approval. I think there is merit for the additional time in which Karen's asking for, given that a number of the adjoining properties in the area do have swimming pools, and they would obviously be using them during the summer period. So if a guest was to use the swimming pool until 10:30 at night, it would be similar to if a normal resident was using it until 10:30 at night. So I don't think it's anything that's unrealistic, or it's an unrealistic request. The short stay certainly provides some needed accommodation within the area, within close proximity to a number of tourism venues. So yeah, hopefully council sees merit in this and resolves to approve it at next week's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fermione. Any questions, councillors? One to staff. Mr. Staff or Mr. Fermione?
Yeah, to the gentleman.
Councillor
Yeah.
Johnson.
Yeah, my question is the objector on an adjoining property or further away?
They are not on an adjoining property. They're over the road. So they're across the road, and their house is, I think it was 256 metres away in that property. So there is a fair bit of separation between the objector's house and the actual house on the subject land.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fermione. Councillor Cole, you got one to staff.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. When this comes back to council in 1 year's time, is it staff to approve it, or will it go back to a sitting of council?
Mr. Russell.
Through Mr. Mayor, look, I'd anticipate that, well, if there's no complaints in terms of its operation, but we could deal with it under delegation, but I would envisage it's probably something we'd bring back to council.
Thank you. No further questions, councillors? Thank you. Now move on to item 4.9, which to amend condition number 2 to extend the term of approval for DA 006/21, a temporary sea container bar at lot 26, number 9810 West Swan Road, Henley Brook. And Mr. Alan G'day from the Swan Valley Tourism Alliance against the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councillors, staff. Before I start, councillors, you would have been issued a copy of our presentation today, but I'll just quickly go through it. Alan G'day, representing the Swan Valley Tourism Alliance. The SVTA objects to the extension to the term of approval for this temporary sea container bar. At the March 17, 2021 council meeting, the original retrospective development application, agenda item 4.12, was considered by council. Council gave conditional approval based on advice from the former Swan Valley Planning Committee. The SVTA also made a submission to council in March 2021. In that submission, we supported the conditional approval, but also made it very clear that the SVTA would not support any further extension to the 17th of June deadline for removal. In support of this original retrospective application, the applicant provided the following information. A, The sole reason to install the temporary sea container bar in an outdoor setting was to assist in complying with COVID-19 social distancing requirements. B, the application did not seek to increase the existing capacity of the venue, and C, the sea container bar will be located on the site until 14th of June 2021, after which date the development would be dismantled and removed from the site in its entirety. Councillors should also note that the temporary sea container bar was installed and operating without the required approvals some week before they submitted their original retrospective application. Councillors, Perth and Peel are no longer subject to post-lockdown restrictions and are under the same restrictions as the rest of Western Australia. All hospitality venues can operate at full capacity. There are no capacity limits. This therefore removes the prime reason for the temporary sea container to remain on site. If the proponent sees an ongoing benefit to having an exterior bar, then they should be encouraged to apply to construct an appropriate permanent structure to facilitate that need. Sea containers have regularly been refused as structures used other than for storage within the Swan Valley legislative precinct. A recent example of this is the refusal by Council of the Elmar Brewery's application. With the commencement of the new Swan Valley Planning Scheme 1, approval for sea containers are more restrictive and approval is based on storage use only. I direct councillors to Schedule 5, Item 2.6 of the Swan Valley Planning Scheme 1, which outline those conditions. Sea containers are not considered to reflect the rural character expected within the legislated precinct. Further, the attempt to screen the container did not achieve the desired result of reducing the visual impact from West Swan Road. In fact, the use of white lattice only made the structure more visible, and the end of the container can still be seen from West Swan Road. Therefore, we urge Council to remain steadfast with its original determination of conditional approval to allow the container to remain on site until the 17th of June 2021 and recommend refusal of extending the approval to June 2022 to the Swan Valley Statutory Planning Committee. Thank you.
Any questions of Mr. G'day? Thank you, Lance.
Thank you.
Now move to 411. The deja vu. Sea container shade sales and lunchroom at lot 128, number 104, Swan Street, Henley Brook. And Ms Alison Cundard from the Swan Valley Tourism Alliance also speaking against the recommendation.
Good evening, Mr Mayor, Deputy Mayor, councillors and staff. Thank you for the opportunity to comment yet again on sea containers. Our concern with this particular development is that it is in a very pristine part of the Swan Valley legislative planning precinct, surrounded by a number of agricultural developments, for example, Funk Cider and another winery just up the road. We do not support the approval of this retrospective development on the grounds that it does not meet the expectations of the new Swan Valley Planning Scheme 1. In the report that you received from the planning officers, the report advises that sea containers, demountable buildings and or shade structures similar to those proposed are not uncommon in this locality. That might be the case. There are, and the officers have alluded to approximately 50% of neighbouring properties having similar structures on there. However, we don't know whether any of these structures have been approved or have just proliferated as they seem to do throughout the Swan Valley, and if so, if they have been approved, they would have been approved under LPS 17. This application must be assessed under Swan Valley Planning Scheme 1. And because of this, I specifically direct you to Schedule 5, Item 2.6, which deals directly with sea containers and transportable buildings within the Swan Valley Planning Precinct. Areas of concern for the Alliance include the plans that were provided by the proponent have actually omitted a shed-like structure which is in the north-eastern corner, if you look at the overall near maps photograph that was provided by staff. So that's quite a permanent-looking structure, and in fact we provided some photos of that structure and of the streetscape of the sea containers and the other large shed structure that's on site. We're concerned that there's a large lunchroom as part of this development which has 3 toilets, but no knowledge of how many planned staff are required to use a structure of that nature. The site has been used or may still be being used for non-agricultural purposes, and I again refer councillors to those photos that we provided, which show quite a lot of industrial type items on the site. The Alliance also consulted with some of our members who actually grow grapes and avocados and fruit trees within the Swan Valley Planning Precinct, and we've basically been advised that the proposed agricultural component of this development application is not of a commercial scale, and therefore the storage requirements would be quite negligible. So, in conclusion, given the above concerns that the Alliance has, we ask councillors to support the former Swan Valley Planning Committee's advice and recommend refusal of this application to the Swan Valley Statutory Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Cundit. Any questions, councillors? No, thank you. Now move to 4.14, the proposed use of a portion of land for recreation, private gym and veterinary centre, including associated buildings and works at Lot 23, Banara Road, Caversham. And our speaker on this, Mr Jason Hunt from Statewide Planning, on behalf of the applicant in support of the recommendation. Thank you, Mr Hunt.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor, Deputy Mayor, councillors and staff, for an opportunity to speak here. I'm speaking in support of the office's recommendation for the proposed centre at Lot 23, Banara Road. This application relates to a portion of the site which many of the councillors may be aware of. It's the section of land at the rear of Better Pets and Gardens, which is located on the corner of Lord and Banara Road. The section proposed for redevelopment was previously used for a propagation nursery. This use is, however, stopped, and the land is vacant, cleared, and is now the subject of this application. The landowners, Altone Holdings Proprietary Limited, had previously obtained development approval for the site for exactly what is being proposed again now in mid-2017 for a variety of reasons, including other projects that took up their capital. They unfortunately didn't complete it in that time, and so we've now been required to relodge another application. In the time that passed, as is the way in the world of planning, it moved, it changed, and so we've had to make modifications to what's proposed on site to accommodate those changes. They predominantly relate to State Planning Policy 3.7, which you'd all be familiar with. That's the planning for bushfire prone areas. The proposals for a commercial building, but still under the policy, there's a requirement for the location, once it's all completed, to be in an area that has a BEL rating of 29 or lower. This resulted in the building being modified slightly, and that's what's now shown on the plans that have been lodged, and with this modification it does achieve this requirement. The site has frontage to Lord and Banara Road, as I'd mentioned. However, access to what's being proposed here will occur over the existing crossover from Lord Street, and this, along with many other items that are being shown in this proposal, are exactly as they were on the previous approval. The eastern portion of this site is impacted by the 330 kVA power lines, and there's a 60-metre easement in favour of Western Power. This is the section of land which is identified in the MRS as a regional reserve, as it also contains Bennett Brook in its eastern section. There's no development proposed in this because, as I mentioned, that's part of the regional reserve. The lots to the north of this particular site also have the same zoning, which is general rural, and they currently are occupied by 2 buildings which are used for places of worship. This particular piece of land, including the land to the north, is a little bit unusual. In the MRS, it's zoned for urban deferred. The reason for it being urban deferred is due to the impacts of a poultry farm in Bennett Street, and while that remains, the deferral will remain in place, but it has been designated for future urban development, and the proposed land uses suit its current zoning and also its future zoning. What's being proposed is a gym, which has a maximum of 60 people, and also a veterinary clinic. The access will be sealed, marked, curbed and linked to the existing facilities. Drainage on the site will be linked to the existing approved drainage, and the current approved discharge rates of 79 litres per second will be maintained. These are all items and factors that were considered and approved in the previous approval. Traffic at the site will circulate in a clockwise motion, and there's been sweep paths provided showing how this will facilitate traffic movement and service vehicles. In conclusion, Mr Mayor, the proposed land uses are both D uses, so discretionary uses in the City of Swan scheme, and have previously been approved at the site and once again are supported by the City's officers. We think that what's being proposed will be compatible with the surrounding, the neighbours, the area, the future zoning, and also will provide facilities that are in match with what's currently on the site. We seek you to support the officer's recommendation and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr Hunt. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Coley.
Jason, thanks for that. I was actually in the store today buying a few things, and I'm fairly familiar with it because I get a lot of things from there actually. I'm concerned about the parking, to be honest. There seems to be an intensification of the lot, which even today I had to wait to get out, wait for two cars to back out, and also in relation to the movement of lucerne and hay on the south boundary that's always stored there. I mean, I'm not too sure how you're going to deal with that, and I'm not satisfied at the moment that it's capable of dealing with that number of extra people on site. So I'm wondering if you could satisfy me or explain a little bit more how you think that's going to work. Is the current shop going to reduce the amount of goods it stocks, for example?
Councillor Coley, you might have to have a look at page 558 of your agenda. I'll answer your question there about parking.
With all due respect, Mayor, I've seen the parking layout, and that's what's concerning me. But there is an intensification of the areas already. They're already being utilised for storage of hay and lucerne and the like, and other matters. There's the sea container also with hay in it.
Stan, you just want to answer that?
Yeah, certainly. The parking that's been provided on site complies with the requirements of the City of Swan's parking requirements. I do accept your point that when someone is given extra space, they just sort of utilise that and overload. And I have been there myself, where a number of the car parking bays have got fruit trees in them, and items like that. The plan shows that those areas that are currently, where you mentioned on the south side, that's part of the circular traffic movement, and there will be parking bays that are orientated along that. The current lease area of the current tenant is the parking areas that are provided and also the building space. So the areas that are being developed are not within their leasehold, or they have a shared right for them in terms of where the parking is going to be provided and areas like that. So it will need to be managed on the site, but the flow of the traffic and the amount of parking bays, as I said, do comply, and I think that they've just expanded in their area because they can, unfortunately.
Thanks, Ms Hunt. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a quick question then. In terms of the gym users, peak times, morning, evenings, hopefully coincide with obviously the operation of the second business, but will there be any crossover with people competing for the parking then? The popularity of the gym is utilised?
Yeah, no, certainly. Good question. My apologies. I do have the details of the hours of operation for the gym. What the hours of operation for the gym are to be looked at is it'll be a maximum of 60 people, including staff at any one time, and the hours of operation proposed are 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. So it's the landowner is looking at gyms that operate in a similar way to something like an F45 style, where they're classes that are very early in the morning, and then wouldn't have an impact with the other land users on the site, and then that maybe have A class at the end of the day.
Just another question quickly then. In terms of staff, what are the numbers of staff on site at that gym then?
For that number of people, that's looking to be 3 or 4 staff.
And parking's included for them as well?
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
Councillor Scully.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, Jason, the veterinary use of the building, the extension. I note the fake grass at the back. I assume that's for dogs to be kept outdoors in a caged area or a fenced-off area. Is that what it's for?
The fake grass, that particular area where that portion of the building is, there used to be a portion of building there. That's the section of the lot that's impacted in regards to the changes about bushfire separations.
Right.
So we toyed with a lot of uses for that particular portion of it, whether it would be somewhere that would be available for potentially outdoor exercise, or whether it would be somewhere that, yes, you could take the dogs to walk around. The officer who assessed this raised a question in regards to the fake grass, and we had spoken with, because I believe someone who objected raised a concern over the use of petrochemicals in the production of fake grass. And we had indicated that that could easily be a compacted gravel or a material like that. What the intention for it was to be not an area that caused a fuel load problem.
Right, okay. And so there potentially will be dogs in a fenced-off area there, in an open area.
There is... The area at this point is also lined up that there would be a spot that people could pull in for a loading bay area. That there's a little bit of a location there that, if it was compacted or a solid area, that would allow people to pull over, because the loading bay is located just associated with that. It could potentially be used for that if that was suitable and able to be approved, yes.
And given it's a veterinary centre, would there be dogs housed there overnight, either indoors or outdoors?
No, that wasn't the intention of it.
Would that be a condition that, if it did get approved, that the applicant would be happy with, that they wouldn't be permitted to be housed there, given their proximity to nearby houses?
If that was something that the council saw that they wanted to impose, then... Yeah.
Any further questions, councillors? Thank you, Mr Hunt. Councillor, we now move to item 420, which is development application. Thank you, councillors. Metronet Stage 1 Morley to Ellenbrook line, the Ellenbrook train station, various lots in Ellenbrook. And the first speaker is Mr Ray Heron from Urbis in support of the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, councillors and staff. My name's Ray Heron. I'm from Urbis, and we are working with the Melconex consortium who are delivering the Morley to Ellenbrook line. The development application that is being presented today is for the Ellenbrook station, including the adjoining car park, bus station and plaza. I would highlight that Chris Quinn from Melconex, Nigel Saul from PTA and Lee Boucher from PTA are also in attendance. If there are technical questions, I'll be deferring to them. We are speaking in support of the recommendation and thank the staff for their cooperation in relation to the report that's been presented to you. There are 13 parcels of land which front on to the parkway. It includes, as I mentioned, a bus interchange which includes 12 bays plus 6 layover and 502 parking bays which incorporate a mixture of short-term, long-term and kiss and ride. The design for the station has gone through extensive engagement with the State Design Review Group and obviously careful consultation dealing with operational considerations for the future station.
Just 1 second. Councillors, in your supplementary agenda. Thank you. Keep going.
No worries. We're happy to take on board part of the recommendation which seeks for the consortium to take on board feedback in consultation with LWP and the city regarding the traffic. As was being discussed earlier, obviously as progress continues and details are developed, things will be refined. However, the station building itself is clearly obviously fixed element, and there will be ongoing consultation and engagement further to what's occurred to date. I think it would be fair to say that the delivery of the station would be long awaited, but I'm happy to take questions.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Golly.
Thank you, Mayor. The station, it's got some really good press, and I noticed in the paper a few weeks ago that it got, I think, a double-page spread and is much needed, as you said. But the consideration of a multi-storey building on the site rather than just single level, why was that not considered?
Well, I would have to defer to the PTA in relation to the item as to, obviously, the consortium are working to a brief, and the brief is obviously quite specific around the nature and extent and scale of each of the stations. That has been determined through, a range of modelling around patronage. I would suggest, however, that there's nothing within the proposal which would prevent that from occurring in the future, and there is always that careful balance around meeting what is the current demands and budget versus ensuring that there is a robust design that's able to respond to future requirements. But I will look to Lee if you wanted to add to that.
Sorry, thank you. No, definitely, Ray. There would no doubt have been a budget element to it, so I should just clarify that I'm from the delivery team but have some knowledge of some of the planning and considerations, and have been at PTA for about 20 years, so I've been involved in the planning of other stations. A lot of it really comes down to the value of the land and the other development opportunities around the land. If it comes down to it's really finite, then that's a bit of a no-brainer that you need to have that operational requirement for a certain number of bays. So we would look to do that. Generally speaking, in this area here, it was considered that we would have sufficient at-ground, if you like, space to provide that. But like Ray mentioned, I guess that there's an element of land banking that we do. There's that consideration of if you've got the plans, there is both parking to the north and the south that allows for, over time, should there be a need to only retain one section of that, that can be rationalised and potentially used for other purposes. So it was in our mindset. If you've been part of the journey in the development of the station, previously it was all located on one side of the station, and that was actually the design and review panel feedback, and also the city shared that as well, that we create that separation, both for the catchment, but also that potential to potentially change things when the value, I guess, rose to that level, that you could use there'd be higher and better use of that potential site. Around the area, obviously, there's a lot of land there as yet to be developed, and we've been in discussions with LWP around that, and that's something that may be a bit of a factor as well. So depending on how those other land uses change over time, if that is something that requires more activation or is thought to add more value to that precinct, the number of bays is something that a lot of governments debate. Certainly we tend to have that heavy demand on park and ride. We do try and encourage people to use the bus to get there. Ray talked about it. There's a significant bus interchange there, and there is that functionality for those that are familiar at the moment in the city. The feeder buses come in, transfer to your 955, 96, 956, which is a high-frequency bus. So there is that expectation that over time, hopefully, behaviours will change, but there is also that reluctant acceptance that we live in Western Australia and the reliance on motor vehicles. So, yeah, I think if you consider it in the context of it's designed to meet today's needs now and expectations, but it does actually create a land bank where government secures this land and does that opportunity to rethink about it down the track.
Any further questions, councillors? Thanks, guys. Appreciate that. Okay. So our last one's gone. Okay, councillors, the last deputation is a confidential item, so we just need to go behind closed doors. So if I could just ask members of the gallery if they would like to leave. And 4.5, as we mentioned.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, 4.1, which is the scheme amendment for the Western Swamp Tortoise, as I alluded to and as the report states, this has been a matter some 10 years in the offing.
No, not now, because the people going to present aren't here. they're interested in one of the items on the agenda, I think, aren't they, Megan? This item. This item, in fact. Carry on, Phil.
I think they're just talking. Thank you, Mr Mayor. As I was saying, this item's the background to this is some 10 years in the offing. In the late 1990s, early part of the 2000s, the Environmental Protection Agency developed up an environmental protection policy to protect the western swamp tortoise and its habitats in this locality in Upper Swan. Back at the time, there was a push, certainly from the environmental point of view, to have the general rural land holdings surrounding the two nature reserves to somehow limit the nature of the uses in terms of achieving a better outcome for the swamp tortoise, primarily in terms of limiting uses that might cause predation of the western swamp tortoise and uses that might cause impacts on groundwater and the hydrology of the area that will impact the swamp tortoise habitat. I suppose you might say that a Faustian bargain, or a type of Faustian bargain, was entered into, if I can be so melodramatic in the language, between landowners who had general rural zone land and the state to effect the rezoning of the land from general rural and effectively in an endeavour to extinguish existing rural land use rights, to place tight restrictions for the purposes of benefiting the swamp tortoise. And the carrot, I suppose, was the nature of providing some capacity for landowners to subdivide. What ended up happening through the process, and perhaps unforeseen by the landowners at the time, was that the intended 2 hectare subdivision that they were seeking, and you heard again this evening many are still seeking, was at the 11th hour through the process struck out by the then Minister of the Environment on advice to her colleague, the Planning Minister. So what ended up happening is, through this arrangement that perhaps you might say from a landowner's perspective went somewhat wrong, is that they traded off their general rural land use rights but did not receive the intended compromise or concession of achieving subdivision potential below 8 hectares. And that has been the case for many a year. More recently, the EPA, in trying to broaden the environmental protection policy through our scheme and seeking to broaden this amendment, have been in negotiations with these landowner groups and with the City and with the Department for Planning to try and formulate a round 2 or second amendment that might broaden the extent of the controls by rezoning land from general rural to a special purpose zone, special use zone here, by again broadening these restrictions on land use, but again offering the concession of the potential to subdivide. Now, what we have here, as is clearly articulated, is there's effectively 2 precincts. A precinct of land that abuts the swamp tortoise habitats, where the amendment is quite clear, 8 hectares only. So in many instances what that might mean is that some of those lots might not have subdivision potential. The benefit of the subdivision potential in theory is only to be realised, and I'll caveat that because there's quite a few hoops that landowners would need to jump through, as you can see in the amendment. But the benefit of subdivision potential only exists for precinct 2, where you can get a range of 2 to 8 hectares. 8 hectares is the default. You might get 2 hectares provided you can satisfy all the criteria listed in the amendment in terms of demonstrating that there is no adverse impacts on the swamp tortoise and there are no adverse hydrological impacts on their habitat. Now, in relation to a lot of these submissions, as you can see in here and against what the proponents are after, at no point over the last 10 years has anyone, and certainly not from the EPA, indicated that they're prepared to go below what for the last 20 years has always been the benchmark of a 2 hectare minimum lot size and concede to permit a 1 hectare. We have nothing from the EPA or any environmental agencies to say that they'd be in favour of this. So I think to be quite blunt, from a staff point of view, we're treading cautiously to not be in a position of seemingly providing for landowners a false promise as to some arrangement that they might receive with respect to subdivision. We haven't got anything from the EPA that says that they will support 1 hectare, and we've got to remember that what we have to be mindful of is we don't want to introduce provisions that aren't part of the arrangement that's been brokered over the last 5 or 6 years, and then have a situation whereby landowners are expecting to receive something, and then as some of the landowners in the existing zone experience become bitterly disappointed to see that they've traded off their rural land use rights but haven't received what they were hoping for in terms of the subdivision potential. So we've left it here as pretty much that we understand is the parameters that the EPA and the environmental agencies are happy enough with, and the arrangements that they're happy enough with set out in the amendment in terms of what is on the table in terms of subdivision, and the conditions whereby a proponent will be able to make a case for subdivision. And that is, as the amendment indicates, 2 to 8 hectares in the broader Precinct 2, and for Precinct 1 that abuts the swamp tortoise habitats, 8 hectares only. That's a potted history, I suppose, of the Western swamp tortoise arrangements with respect to the environmental protection policy and City of Swan planning schemes over the last 20 odd years.
Questions of Councillor Collier.
Where are those people who were represented tonight? Where are their lines of appeal? Who do they appeal to on the decision there? The City or to the Minister?
Through Mr Mayor, to the Minister, and only the Minister.
Thank you.
Councillor Kelani.
Yes, thank you. I noticed that the DBCA have asked that hydrological studies be undertaken prior to the approval of this amendment. I did have a quick look at the City of Swan local rural planning strategy for 2016, which is encouragement to page 273. Yeah, the question, I scanned the questions. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly.
Sorry, getting back to that. Okay, so I'll start again. First of all, I'm going to refer to the fact that DBCA are concerned about the approval of this amendment prior to hydrological studies being undertaken. And, I mean, yeah, okay. So that's an objection that they raised. There's no hydrological. So that's DBCA. Okay. So on page 273 of the report, there's reference to the City of Swan Local Rural Planning Strategy of 2016. Now, there's 2 questions I want to ask. The first question is, in that local rural planning strategy, the City of Swan was supposed to do a review of the local planning scheme to basically just look at how land use around these swamps, basically to address land use activity around the swamps. First of all, question is, did the City of Swan do that review? That's page 29 of that City of Swan Local Rural Planning Strategy. Did the City of Swan undertake that review?
Mr. Ross.
Yes, it was only a couple of years ago that the City reviewed its rural planning strategy. And look, I think what I can say around that originally, as per the previous rural planning strategy, this area was indicated for investigation for this type of, I'll call it rural residential intensification. But what was quite clear when that strategy went off to the Commission is the Commission said, hang on, nothing in the planning framework, the state planning framework that we have indicates that this area is suitable for intensification. The state planning framework more or less took the position to say there is enough small lot, rural residential, special rural, hobby farm, whatever the appellation you want to use to describe that type of lot product, there's enough of that across the Perth metropolitan area, and certainly there was still residual capacity under existing zone land for that type of product. And the state said to us, no, we don't support this area or being indicated in the our local rural planning strategy as being an area to be pursued. So, but I mean, certainly these. It's fair to say that this amendment has been principally driven, as its predecessor had been, by the environmental agencies with respect to giving broader effect through our local planning scheme of the environmental protection policy for the swamp tortoise habitat. It's difficult to say what the state will make of it, but I think it's got to balance out the pluses ostensibly that these controls should bring to the habitat of the swamp tortoise versus the trade-off of having more of this rural residential product. Now, I can say this amendment had been slated to come to the council earlier, but we had concerns around the bushfire risk mitigation assessment done by the proponent, and of course those concerns were expressed to us hot on the heels, Mr Mayor, of course the Warraloo bushfires, and I think it was felt prudent that we needed to delay the presentation of this amendment until DFES had come back and said they're happy enough with the proponent's fire assessment to progress this up to be able to say that we haven't got an objection from DFES. But look, that's where this amendment sits. On the one hand, it's not in line with the state framework from a planning point of view, but on the other hand, it's very much aligned with the environmental objectives of those agencies of the state that are pursuing environmental conservation and the protection of the swamp tortoise habitat.
Sorry, so what year was that review done?
It was only before council, testing my memory, I think the last 2 or 3 years, when the rural planning strategy was represented.
Is there a chance that I could get a copy of that?
Certainly, yes.
Oh, thank you. And okay, all right. There was a thought in my mind, but in the City of Swan local rural planning strategy, and sorry, I just want to get back to that review. That review took into account the land use implications around the swamps, the turtle swamps. Did it specifically?
Not anywhere, understandably, in any way, shape or form at the level of detail that this amendment has done, because this amendment has been drafted up closely with the input of the environmental agencies in a way that the rural planning strategy didn't have, as you'd expect.
The local rural planning strategy on page 38, it said that there wouldn't be any change to reduce the lot sizes down to 2 hectares without the support from the Department of Parks and Wildlife, which we now know is DBCA. So how do we get over that? Because the thing is that we said that we weren't going to rezone without the support, and yet they clearly say that they don't support approval at this stage because the hydrological studies haven't been done.
Through Mr Mayor, look, I don't think there's any contradiction there. The flip side of it might be if you're going to say to the proponent, go away and spend a whole heap of money doing a whole heap of work on a promise with no guarantees that you're going to get an amendment that might conceivably allow you to subdivide, no one's going to do it, Mr Mayor. So around all of that, and we say around that, you will not be able to break ground on subdivision unless and until you've got a subdivision approval, and you won't get that unless and until, if you're looking at subdividing below the 2 hectares, below the 8 hectares to 2 hectares, You won't even get it into that approval unless you've done all the hydrological work. So it will still be done. The DBCA's concern is we want it done. It will still be done and would need to be done under this amendment if it's approved before anyone can hope to get approval to subdivide below 8 hectares. So we think it's an ample safeguard. Asking someone to do it before you even, as a basis to contemplate the amendment, I think pretty much slams the door. And Mr Dobson's not here, but I, without putting words in his mouth, I'm pretty confident in what he'd say. It slams the door on anyone spending any money on a promise with no guarantees. So it's a reasonable and pragmatic compromise, as it must be, to achieve the ends that this amendment's hoping to do.
And the gentleman that was talking, that made his deputation tonight, I understand that the property in question there is in Precinct 1. I think that's what he said. So he was asking for subdivision to go down to 2 hectares. And I don't understand how he's possibly going to get that, given that it's adjacent to the swamp. Did you understand what he was asking for?
Through Mr Mayor, crystal clear what Mr Dobson was
Okay, could you explain it in your words then?
Well, what he was hoping for is to have the lot size potential to go down to 1 hectare, subject to being able to satisfy that there is no adverse impact on the habitat of the swamp tortoise and the hydrology of the land that feeds into the swamp tortoise habitat. So that's and our response to that is there is nothing at all in the history of this area that has ever looked at contemplating subdivision down to 1 hectare, because there is a threshold, and I think Councillor Johnson alluded to it earlier. Intensification of land use, more people with animals, and by that I don't mean farm animals, I mean normal domestic pets, dogs and cats. The natural collateral implication of intensifying people in a habitat such as this is a natural increase in the risk to the swamp tortoise habitat, and that's implicitly understood. So there's got to be a threshold, and the threshold has been set in all the discussions over the last 6 years at nothing below 2 hectares in Precinct 2 and nothing in Precinct 1 below 8. So city staff are not in any way, shape or form in a position to suggest or recommend to the council that we blow the arrangements apart by shooting the moon on minimum lot sizes. If we'd had some feedback from the EPA and the environmental agencies to say, sure, we could, under certain terms and conditions, accede to a 1 hectare minimum lot size, well, that would be a different story. But, Mr Mayor, in the course of this amendment, we simply have no such position or acquiescence to that proposal from the environmental agencies.
Thanks, Mr Russell. Councillor Jones.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I just want to flag that I want to withdraw that. I might have something else to add to it before the meeting next week. Thanks.
Question, Councillor Lucas.
Thank you, Mr Russell, always on his feet. So, Phil, from what I take it, if I'm looking at page 296, we've got the light blue and the light green coloured areas, Precinct 1 and Precinct 2. So all of Precinct 1 are properties that adjoin the reserve. They're in the report to stay at a minimum of 8 hectares, which is perhaps 20 acres in the old language. And areas in Precinct 2 could go down to or between 2 and 8 hectares. Is that my...
That's correct.
But certainly not to 1.
Not to 1. 1 is not anywhere in these arrangements at all.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
No others? Right, Phil, if you want to roll on to 4.5.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. That's the Henley Brook DCP. If I'm picking up, I suppose I'll start this as I've probably alluded to already. This exercise here is to simply bring back to council the fact that the further refinement of the cost estimates for the infrastructure in the proposed amendment has been refined, and the implication of that is largely through refinement around the specs on the details on the transport infrastructure. We have an estimated reduction in the cost of the DCP by some $25 million. Now what you've got in there, you can see that if we look at the attachments, what we've got there is what we call, there's the text there, and of course the amendment is the items that go into the scheme. The document, which is the August 2021 draft Henley Brook Developer Contribution Plan, that's what we call the Developer Contribution Plan report. That sets out all the details of the DCP in terms of, it references what the infrastructure is, what the estimated costs of the infrastructure are listed as line items in those blue tables further on in the report. It indicates the area of land in the development contribution area that which the cost is apportioned across, indicates that. It indicates all those things that we're required to say around how the cost contribution is calculated, how it's reviewed or obligations to review it, and all of these things mirror provisions that are in our local planning scheme. So that's so in effect what we've done, and the legislation or our scheme requires that at least once a year the council or the city reviews its DCP cost contribution schedules and updates that so that there is updated cost apportionment across the various landowners in the development contribution plan area. You can see there there are also what I call map attachments. Now that indicates the first map, which is on page 397, of course, indicates the developer contribution area, and that overlay you can see there is actually the structure plan overlay, the approved structure plan overlay, and you can see conceptually these structure plans are basically, it's a blob of brown being the urban residential areas, the road network you can see there in grey, through the middle of the structure plan area, and a purple is the gas pipeline area. The green, of course, is the public open space, and the yellow is the schools. And then the various other maps through the rest of it indicate the road infrastructure, the land required for road widening, and you can see there it's got the road infrastructure and the intersection treatments. Reference was made to roundabouts, so we've got roundabouts, T-junctions and other bits and pieces there. Further along you can see, of course, all the various green areas, which is the public open space. Critically, it's also indicating on one of the pages there, page 394, that's for the purpose of showing you that what's going into the DCP is also 2 sporting pavilion community centre infrastructure arrangements on those 2 areas of public open space. And then you've got the bits and pieces around the gas pipeline corridor that's going into it. And then when you get to those tables, which have a prefix to them, that is the infrastructure item that you can cross-reference to the maps, where you've got the various infrastructure coded items on the maps, and that has indication details with respect to the costing of those, the estimates, the timing of delivery, the description of the infrastructure. Like I'll just take one there, for example, it's got HINTO1, it says Starflower Road and Henley Street, that's in the nature of an intersection. And then it indicates further on the table there that the intersection type is a single 4-way roundabout. Estimated year of construction, 2022. Okay. And then further along it sets out the estimated costs of those, and then critically there it also indicates the cost apportionment. Most of the infrastructure items in here, barring 2, are 100% allocated to the land within the developer contribution area. There are a couple of intersection treatments where they will be serviced and will be utilised by areas outside of the DCA, and that is then the balance of the cost of that area, then of the use of that infrastructure, goes to council, as well as, of course, the listing in there for Henley Brook Avenue, where, as everything else that we've done in the growth corridor with Henley Brook Avenue, it's the balance of the works outside of all of the earthworks and one carriageway resides with us as local government. That's effectively the mechanics of what you've got before you and what all these tables mean and maps. And all we're at this point here is there's a constant annual review, and we're doing it more frequently than that, where we're going through and updating these costs. And as it actually transpires, you saw Mr. Alakowski this evening, we're sitting down with him and Chris Lewis of Progress Development, the other developer entity I referenced here tonight, and we'll be running down with staff, running through with their technical people, line item by line item, all of the items here in the DCP and how we've costed it. So it is a rigorous process. We are doing it. It's important to remember these are estimates. Estimates change. It's the nature of an estimate until you've got what we call the actual cost contribution, which is the actual cost of actually delivering the infrastructure. So this I think it's important to remember, the costs might seem high and people in the community might fear that they are high, but ultimately, as things get refined, not always, but in often instances, we get further clarity around the cost estimates. They often do come down, but ultimately, the cost is the cost, and that is the cost, and the finality around that is the actual cost of when the item is actually delivered. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So, Phil, it is the case, though, if a developer were to put in some of the items in the DCP themselves, we all know that they can do it cheaper in the City of Swan, that's then credited against their DCP, isn't it?
That's right. They can offset any works in kind that they produce against the contribution liability. And importantly, the other thing it's important to remember is, and I often say this to parties, if we get a DCP that comes in and someone is absolutely dead set certain that the costs that we have in our DCP are off the planet, then they can challenge the cost contribution liability we serve them and have that adjudicated in a court. So there are checks, and it's not often remarked on when we hear about these things. The system has the checks and balances to ensure that if someone is really aggrieved that they're being overcharged, then they can appeal that cost contribution liability, and that has always been in planning schemes in WA.
Councillor Coley.
Phil, if you take a seat if you like, but you're up there for a while. But my question is the engineering standards of like a roundabout done by the or by the developer. Do we have any guarantee that the road base for roads is any better than what the city would do, or what standards are applied to? It might be through gyms.
Well, I would just say it's like everything else, is that we've got like subdivisional works, when they come to hand them over to us, at practical completion, we've got to be satisfied that they're to our specs.
But how do we know that if we're not overseeing the construction or the measuring depths of road bases and the like, how do we know that we're not being handed over something that's going to require complete redoing within 10 to 15 years?
Mr. Coaten, I think that's one for you.
We do inspect during construction. We have inspection points and hold points on all subdivisions, so staff do go and check that work when it's being done as part of subdivisions.
So you're satisfied that that would be a suitable arrangement?
Yeah. That happens everywhere. We do hundreds of lots, subdivisions all day, every day, and
okay.
Yeah, it works.
And one last question, Mayor, through you. In discussions with the developer, the talk of 80,000 per block, is that a reasonable assessment of the DCP?
I don't. Through Mr. Mayor, I haven't heard anyone say to me $80,000 a lot. That's even before we've revised this, the cost was on noting per lot based on there being only 3,500 lots. Okay, so the cost is the cost, but per lot is based on there only being 3,500 lots in this developer contribution year. That was in the order of about 62. It was never in the order of about $80,000 a lot. It's now down to something lower than that, I think, that's in the report. So I don't know who was banding about the cost of $80,000 a lot. It was never in any of our documentation, even originally.
Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mayor. The devil's always in the detail, and I tried to get an answer earlier, but I don't think I quite got it. Have we elevated our specifications, or are the specifications at a level that's, shall we say, above market or whatever? Or have we seen an escalation in specification requirements across the board? In other words, those specifications may well increase the cost. And for instance, instead of having light poles every 30 metres, can they go every 50 metres with a different kind of light that goes horizontally rather than down? I mean, I'm not sure that I've got all the answers to that, because obviously we'd be digging into a lot of detail. But have we elevated the specification levels?
Mr. Russell or Mr. Cade?
Well, I mean, all I'd say around that, I think, as Mr. Cade's already said, we haven't got subdivision level designs for all of the infrastructure in this DCP yet.
I'm talking about overall.
We're requiring our standard subdivisional developments to be done. So the comment I made earlier about the, like it's being lines, just it's lines on a map. And if you look at something like the drainage design, that's a good example. Until you actually do the drainage design, you don't know how many manholes you need. Manholes are an important component of it. So the answer to your question is no, we're not raising the standards, the specifications.
Over time it hasn't escalated, so it's been pretty much the norm for some time.
Oh, there are variations that do occur in our engineering specifications from time to time, not significant ones. Landscaping is probably an area that's been discussed at this council in numerous occasions where we've got quite clear and specific guidelines, but developers will always and as they should try and embellish a subdivision as much as they can, but that needs to be done within reason in terms of the maintenance costs and things like that. So there are systems and processes in place for managing that.
Councillor Catalano.
Yeah, thank you. So there's two main developers, and on the map here, do we know where Mirvac, which part's theirs and which part's the other developer, which I believe is Progress? And how much of this area is, in fact, not a part of Mirvac and Progress? Just because I'd just like to know what happens to the DCP if that other portion doesn't get developed.
Through Mr. Mayor, probably if you look at your Mirvac have actually on the ground and have got subdivision. If you look at one of the map, any of the map pages there, which has got the structure plan area, if you have a look around Park Street and you go from the left-hand side, heading right along the base of Park Street, you'll see a couple of lots that have got there's a little sort of portion at the front. Looks like a little lot on its own. That basic area there, the land just to the other side of that, that's basically the area where Mirvac are on the ground and Progress have land interests as well. I don't have the current disposition of all of their land holdings. We did have that some time ago, and I can probably chase that up for councillors if they're interested, and I'm sure Mr Alakowski wouldn't have any problem providing any updated details on that. But as you can imagine, with all of these things, the development front usually starts from the immediate access point, which in this instance is Park Street. Look, I think the big issue around all of this, and it was always going to be the case, with 151 lots in separate ownership, I don't know, and at the moment one of the things you've heard with this DCP is that the speculative acquisition of developers making offers to landowners subject to X, Y and Z has been, I suppose you might say, curtailed at the moment on the basis of these cost estimates that we have. Now, again, unless individual landowners in here are prepared to sell to developers, then you could expect that you won't see development happening, or will be fragmented. And that's the very nature of a DCP, is that what it actually requires, and this is a real hot topic, as you would know, councillors, with the state at the moment, is that if you have a DCP, you have with it an obligation as the entity, the controlling entity as a local government, to deliver the infrastructure. And that might often mean to deliver the infrastructure in advance of the land being subdivided by proponents. You could have a situation conceivably where you could get land developers with land that doesn't have a lot of designated public open space on it, or other infrastructure developing all of that. And the result of all of that might be is that you have an area with lots of subdivision and lots on the ground, but maybe not the commensurate amount of public open space. And what that it requires is often the local government to then say, righto, well, we need to, under the DCP, go out and acquire the land for public open space if it's not being delivered by developers as part of the rollout of these estates. So and this is, make no mistake, this DCP is like nothing else that this council in its entire history has ever dealt with. So it's how that will roll out might be dependent upon the land acquisition by developers, the market conditions and their preparedness and capacity to buy more land and to effect the estate layout as you see on your structure plan. But there's a lot of ifs there, Mr. Mayor.
So it's not like other structure plans or DCPs because it's fragmented ownership. Is that why, or what? Why was that? Can you just explain why it's not like the other ones? Because I've only been around for a couple of years.
True, Mr. Mayor, it's because it is an area of land that was rezoned by the state to go to urban, where you had 151 or thereabouts rural residential land parcels, each one in separate land ownership. It wasn't like there was a single developer that had 90% of the land holdings or even 50% of the land holdings. You've got something that might more likely be something like, if they're lucky, 10% of the land holdings. So, and these sorts of areas, the only way of delivering the infrastructure is to have it done by an entity that has got the power to go in and deliver the infrastructure and recoup the cost for a DCP. And there's only two entities in that framework, and it's either the state or it's the local government.
Okay, so that means it could be a similar kind of situation as to what we have in Dayton, where we've got lots of little developers and sort of half-finished estates all over the place and things like that happening.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the analogy's fair enough, but you might say around all, but even Dayton, there was far larger land holdings and less original fragmentation than what you had here, or what you have here.
Right, thanks, Phil. Right, thanks, councillors. Now going to Councillor Lucas, sorry.
Sorry, Phil, you can take this on notice, but the percentage of land holding under Mirvac's, I suppose, development area and progress developments. I mean, I was pretty buoyed by the fact that Mr. Alowski was here tonight representing Mirvac. Now, my understanding is that the city goes through your DCP contributions through a quantity surveyor. You talk to the proponents, in this case Mirvac, on those costings, and then they're independently costed again. We get them independently costed again. Is that correct?
Well, through Mr. Mayor, in this exercise, yes, we've got a quantity surveyor that was appointed to deliver costs. Not just Mirvac, but Progress have said, hang on, these costs are out of whack to what we're getting from our end. So then we've prudently, as you'd expect, decided, well, let's get a second opinion. So let's go and get another quantity surveyor to look at the figures that our originally appointed quantity surveyor has got, to see whether or not, to get an opinion as to whether they think that's out of whack or on the money or a little bit out or the like. And that will be part of the exercise where we get that, of then sharing that with the Mirvac and with Progress in terms of these are our figures. And look, that's certainly expected. and suggested strongly in the recommendation that the department staff made to the State Planning Commission, which is you need to do this, you need to be consultative, you need to get these peer reviewed, you need to do as much as you can to ascertain the veracity of the estimates that we have.
And I'll just close with a comment if I can, Mr Mayor. So my understanding from Alex's presentation tonight was that they accept what the contributions are, even though they're quite staggering sums, but this is a developer who has got a good track record in that urban growth corridor, and I will just mention Aluma Estate, and have completed not only many houses there, but also completed Pegasus Park and Dazzle Park. So they are a high quality developer, and that has allayed a lot of the questions I've been receiving in the last month or two from people not happy, and I'm sure that to everyone, particularly the prospective landowners up there, will be happy to see that the DCPs have gone down $25 million in the last 12 months on our estimation. So, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Right, councillors, I'm now going to run through the items listed for anyone that wants to withdraw them or ask questions. 13.9, you might want to follow me on the agenda, Councillor. Perhaps you might want to use. Yeah, we're going to run through the items now. You might want to follow that one, councillors, so that we go through them, right? So 13.9 is the Noongar art in the chamber.
Yeah, just a question there. There's a diagram provided in the report that shows a little square up on the wall. I've got some concerns that it's limiting the scope of what an artist might potentially want to do, and I'm going to ask that staff make it clear that rectangle or diagram might be unrelated to the actual motion that might get passed. I forget which page it's on, 21 or something. I don't know if councillors have seen it, but it just doesn't relate to the motion, and I want to ensure that the motion doesn't relate to that image.
Mr. Caton?
That does relate to the motion. That's the location that the art is proposed in.
Well, I'll move an alternative to delete that limitation then.
Yeah, it's in terms of, and Councillor Crowley and I had a brief discussion earlier in terms of, well, that's not necessarily the exact extent of it, but if you're talking about something that, wraps around this side wall as well, then, yeah, that's not what's intended. So, that represents a general area, so it could be, bigger than that, but if you're talking about something that, takes up the whole of that, that along the top and coming down the side wall, then that probably would be a...
Now I'm confused. I think we need some clarity around what that square means. 1 minute it does mean it's limited to that.
That is the intended location of the artwork. So it's not the exact location. It may be a little bit, it may be bigger than that, but the discussion we had earlier when you mentioned about it wrapping around this wall, that's not what's intended to happen.
I have an alternative, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, 13.10 is the draft desktop heritage assessment. Councillor Brodovnik has already withdrawn that one. Okay, 3.11 is the Overwith Driveway in Janebrook.
Yeah, I've got an alternate motion for that one, Mr Mayor.
What do you intend to do with that one?
To allow the Overwith Driveway.
To approve it? Okay. 13.12 is the Marshall Road duplication.
Question for staff.
Yep, question, Councillor Johnson.
If I turn to the design, I think page 114 is a good egg. Actually, I think probably the best example is page 113. It's puzzled. The design of the roundabouts is extremely puzzling. Particularly if you look at on page 113, the roundabout at the top right, it's somewhat impeding the flow of traffic, and it's potentially hazardous, I think. Drivers, if you imagine a driver heading from the bottom of the page to the top of the page, as you're approaching the roundabout, instead of concentrating on the roundabout, you're concentrating on driving left, then driving right, and then coming onto the roundabout, whereas your concentration should be on the roundabout an oncoming traffic. I'm just wondering why this asymmetric roundabout design, which I find very strange.
Yeah, they're pre-deflections, so and that is the intention of them, that they will slow vehicles down when approaching roundabouts.
Surely it's less safe in this way. Surely a straight road onto the roundabout is safer, and it's reasonable for a car to drive across a roundabout at a speed that the driver thinks is reasonable. So we let the driver make the assessment, and we have a cheaper road and a safer road. Wouldn't that be a reasonable thing to do? I know some councillors looking puzzled, but you don't see designs of roundabouts like this in the UK.
It is designed in accordance with relevant standards, and the pre-deflections are something that have been introduced relatively recently in relation to roundabouts, but that is their intention, that vehicles will slow down when entering the roundabout.
So are they mandatory to have these strange pre-deflection designs? We couldn't just put up a sign that says slow down, there's a roundabout.
Well, I don't know whether you've ever driven into one, Councillor Johnson, but you might want to take a run up to Millhouse and West Swan. There's one there and it slows you down, I can tell you, because I use it about 6 times a day.
You're supposed to use your brakes. Use your brain and your brakes.
Like I said, go out there and give it a try. I'll give you the GPS coordinates if you can't find it. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. Mr Coaten, at the meeting we had, there was some discussion about the chicanes at Marshall and Beachborough. In terms of removing them because of the amount of space they took, did that progress any further? Were they remaining or being removed?
Well, what's in the recommendation was just to review the need for them. So that's this is only a 15% design stage, so it needs to progress through further to 50%, 85% and 100%. So what we've undertaken is to review the need for those as part of the design process as it progresses. And until we progress with that design process, we can't say, yes, they're going to be in, or no, they're not. That's what the design process is about. But it is included in the recommendation, which was what the landowners requested.
And the speed limit at that area, I think, is 70 k's an hour.
Yeah, it's posted at 70. The design speed is 80, but it's posted at 70.
Right, and given that the speed is lower, and also for the Silver Swan intersection, is there room to, shall we say, reduce the severity of those chicanes at that 70 speed?
Well, that's what will be investigated as part of the design process.
So if we can get down to no chicanes at Beachborough and Marshall, I'm really wondering, where do we sit? Why do we need chicanes?
Mr. Coaten.
I think I've done my best to answer that question.
Yeah.
I've got nothing else.
I think you've had a pretty good try, Jim.
I think I was trying to put a statement to the question.
Okay. Councillor Parry. Nothing? Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mayor. Jim, just on the corner of Beachborough and Marshall, just to be clear, those are underpasses under the road, is that correct? Joining the bike/pedestrian paths?
No, that's not correct.
The four...
I think you're probably looking at the pedestrian crossings.
You mean they're over the road rather than under the road?
No, they're at grade.
At grade, okay. Have we got any more indication? I mean, is that the proposed access to the station in the future, that they would be at grade? You'd have to cross over the road while people are manoeuvring their way through chicanes.
That's the 15% design at this stage. The Metronet have got a team looking at pedestrian, with city staff will have some engagement with them and will be further involved in relation to pedestrian access to the new station. So that is a separate project looking at getting pedestrians not just across this intersection but in the general area into the new station. So, but yeah, that's the design as it's proposed at the moment. And you will recall at the meeting that your attended, there were a number of other options that were suggested as well in terms of pedestrian lights and things like that. We don't believe there'd be adequate warrant for that. But yeah, those pedestrian access is a key part of the design, which will be assessed as the design progresses. But MetroNet are certainly very aware of that, and have got a team looking at it.
And one other thing, we've heard from the lot 1102 that on the corner, what was the feedback after the meeting from lot 1103?
When we left the meeting, my understanding was that the people were satisfied with the proposed, the discussions we've had on the proposed recommendation, which is as we've written it there. So yeah, I can't sort of speak on their behalf, but at the meeting they indicated that. Yeah, he was representing the Potter's House. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So the consultant for Potter's House was here. I personally haven't heard from the other landowners since our meeting, but certainly at the meeting that we had, they indicated consensus with the suggested recommendation.
Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, I just want to clarify when councillors are talking about chicanes, what are they talking about? Because I don't see a chicane on here.
I believe they're referring to the pre-deflection, so the curvatures in the road leading into the roundabout.
I just wanted to clarify that because a chicane for me is something different.
Any other questions on that one, councillors?
Yeah, no more questions, but I'll move an alternate motion on this one, Mr Mayor. I think the chicanes are a bit extreme.
Thanks, councillors. 2.1 is policy review, media protocols. 2.2, policy review logo, civic crest. 3.1 is the adoption of the Midland Local Plan.
I've got a question on that, though.
Yep, fire away.
Page 194, there's this action and response in regard to walk trails and bird hides down at the river foreshore, Ray Marshall Park. So it says the city is currently investigating future plans for Ray Marshall Park. I wonder if we could have a bit more information about what these future plans are.
Mr. Russell? Is it yours? Or is it
well, the short answer to that is yes, Mr Mayor. We can source an update on what, if we've got some plans at the moment, what those are, and share those with interested councillors, including Councillor Catalano, yes. I haven't got the information at hand, you'll have to forgive me.
Okay then. Right, would you be able to do that? Thank you.
Yep. Nothing further on that. 4.1 is the Western Swamp Tortoise. Councillor Jones indicated she's going to do something with that. Any questions? Any further questions, Councillor, with the multitude we already had?
Just a question. Councillor Congot had mentioned he went to a meeting in regards to that. When was this? When did that occur? And was it out to all councillors to attend?
I don't know what he was talking about.
I think you were talking about Beachborough Marshall Road.
Marshall Road meeting.
I thought that was related to the Western Swamp and the removal of the clay pits.
Councillor, he mentioned my name, but I don't recall any conversation with him about it. And maybe he's got the wrong councillor.
Okay, nothing further on that one. 4.2 is the Elvira Chalets. Anything? Okay, 4.3 is the Bellis Precinct Commercial to Residential.
Got a further question about this one, Mr Mayor. It's something very unexpected on the plan, which is why I didn't raise it before. And it is correct. On page 363, I wonder if Mr Russell could turn to that page, and we'll see between Helen and Raisin Street, at the left-hand side, there's an irregular shape with R20 on it. So just above the HE. And to my understanding is that is Todd Park, and I've just checked that on the city's intramaps, that is Todd Park. I'm wondering if it's a park, why is it zoned R20? Wouldn't it be better to be zoned as a reserve?
Mr. Russell?
Through Mr. Mayor, well, I suppose the question is whether or not the existing zoning map's been represented somewhat inaccurately in terms of I can check that. I don't see any. It may well be the fact that it's a park, but it doesn't. I mean, it would check to see if it's actually a local reserve as depicted on our scheme. There might be an error around that, but what I can say is it doesn't change what is occurring under the amendment, which only relates to those two pieces of land. So the fact that it's not depicted on this map as a piece of green space as a park doesn't have any bearing on the amendment. But I can get back and advise whether that's just an error in the printing of the mapping or whether or not that's actually under our scheme zoned a residential with a density coding and not actually depicted as a local reserve.
Just a further question on that. This is, having just looked at the city's public intramap system, it says that there are actually two lots just there, which comprise the park, and it does state that it's zoned residential. It doesn't give an R20 zoning though. The real question is where, I guess through Mr. Mayor to Mr. Hall, where is the actual zoning table held? Is it in intramaps or is it somewhere else?
Mr. Russell?
No, it's in intramaps, but legally it is the ministerially endorsed local planning scheme copy.
All right, but the local planning scheme copy, when I last looked, does not contain a map. It refers to intramaps.
No, we have approved scheme maps, Mr. Mayor. So that's the authorised scheme copy.
All right. So then the proper course of action then is to verify whether intramaps and this diagram and the authorised scheme copy are in agreement or not. Is that the next step?
As Mr. Russell said, it doesn't have any bearing on the two lots.
Yeah, but my concern is this, Mr. Mayor. If this piece of land is, as it says here, zoned R20, and I believe intramaps also shows it zoned as residential, then a reasonable step to take at this point would be to change the zoning of that piece of land. It was Lot 1 and Lot 500, and change it to local reserve. While we're at it, we might as well rectify the error. So that would be my proposal. So I'd like to know how that land is actually zoned, and if it's not zoned as a local reserve, I'll be notifying an alternate motion to turn it back into a park before it goes the way of all the other parks in
Can you take it up with Mr. Russell tomorrow? Okay, so you might do something, you might not, you don't know until you talk to Mr. Russell, is that what we're saying?
Once we've got the facts, if the facts show that it is zoned R20 in the scheme map, then I'll be moving an alternate motion to turn that Lots 1, Lot 500 into a local reserve. Thank you.
Okay, we move to 4.4. Nothing. 4.5. DCP, Henley Brook. Good. 4.6, which is the RAR for a warehouse in Malaga. 4.7 is the short stay in Brigadoon. Councillor Henderson's indicated he's going to move an alternate.
Question on that.
Question, Councillor Crowley.
Do we have a policy on Airbnb at all? Anything that might resemble a policy on the use of Airbnb?
Mr. Russell?
No, Mr. Mayor, we don't currently.
Nothing else? No other questions, Councillor? Okay, 4.8 is the SAT appeal. Refusal of the extension of term planning for two offices and on Great Northern Highway in Bullsbrook. Um, 4.9.
I just wanted to know when the Swan Valley planning issues were going to go over to the state government.
Mr. Russell?
Mr. Mayor, they're with the state government right now.
Okay, so these are sort of ones that have been left over, that we're dealing with these ones, the ones that have already been applied to at the city, is it?
Through Mr. Mayor, yeah, these are in the nature of already on the agenda, going up for decisions that were changed subsequent to Scheme 1 coming in on August the 6th that were changed to recommendations, so the residual. There's about just under 30 applications in the system that haven't yet been determined and or presented to council that have been packaged off now to the Department for Planning for WAPC's processing.
Right. Okay, 4.10. Oh, sorry, Councillor Zania. Are you doing something with that? 4.9. No, 4.10, wasn't it? Okay, then 4.10 is the accommodation chalets in Herne Hill. Nothing, okay. 4.11 is the sea container shade sales in Swan Street, Henley Brook. Nothing.
Maybe for me, if Rod doesn't take it up.
4.12, the parking commercial vehicles in Balladura. Yep. Councillor Congdon to do something with it.
Yeah, I'll talk to Phil.
4.13 is the proposed use of existing car base for storage in Malaga. 4.14 is the portion of land for a gym and vet centre in Caversham. To do.
Not sure yet. Mayor, can I ask the shaking of the head? What was that in reference to?
I thought you would have might had some idea what it's going to be. You've got three choices: amend it, refuse, or approve it. So, do you want to do either one of those? At least give us an indication, I think, councillors, what you want to do with it. But if you have it, we'll carry on.
I would go for refusal then, Mayor, at the moment, but I'm just as likely to change that as well.
Yeah, I figured that. Okay, 4.15 is the additional driveway. In
Sorry, Mayor,
I
don't think you need to make comments like that.
Well, no, it's
as
fair,
you figured
you're
that.
make up your mind what you want to do with it.
Well, I figure you'd make a comment like that.
Well, there you go. Okay, councillors,
So,
4.15 additional driveway.
Question,
Henley
Mr.
Brook.
Mayor. You've also done that to me this evening, and can you just treat all councillors with equal respect, if you don't
I'll
mind?
give
Thank
you all the love you need, Councillor Johnson.
And that's
4.15.
another example of it, Mr. Mayor.
We're getting back to 4.15, councillors, the additional driveway in Henley Brook. Nothing. 4.16, the proposed shed in Champagne Terrace of Vines. 4.17, a home business in Westchester Place, Balladura.
Yep.
To do.
Maybe a minute.
Well, make up your mind. Is it going to be an amendment or a refusal or a, you know, this is exactly what
Sorry.
Which is it?
Well, you indicated what you were going to. You said you're going to amend it.
I said maybe an amendment.
Maybe an amendment.
So I said maybe an amendment.
Make up your mind.
Sorry.
Well, councillors, can we carry on? 4.11 is the garage extension in Balladura. 4.19, statutory planning decisions under delegated authority. 4.20, the Ellenbrook train station. 4.10, the secondary access, Shady Hills.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to ask some questions.
Yep,
I'd
go
like
for
to
it.
ask some questions.
Yep.
So, am I right when I read this that basically the landowners have not agreed to the city, to ceding the land to the city?
Mr. Russell or Mr. Coates?
There are some things that they've agreed to, and they will cede it to the city on certain conditions, but not on other conditions. So it's not quite as simple as
Okay.
yes or no.
So, what conditions have they agreed to cede to the city?
Mr. Coates?
If the city enters into an agreement with them with the revised conditions as outlined in the report, then and the subdivision proceeds as outlined, then the land would be ceded to the city. If they get a subdivisional approval which is to their satisfaction, but they make a commercial decision not to proceed, then they will cede the land to the city. So there's a variety of different scenarios.
So, okay. So we're asking for the city to build the road, even though we don't know whether the landowners are going to agree to cede the land.
Well, it's not so much ceding the land, but it is the condition that the subdivision, there is a possibility the subdivision may not go ahead at all.
Okay, and then what happens then?
Well, if if the recommendation is adopted, then the city would go and build the road with the money that's been received from the state government and the city making up the shortfall.
What do you think the city's going to spend on building this road? And then obviously they'll have to purchase the land, will they, from the landowners if the subdivision doesn't go ahead?
Mr. Gatton?
Yeah, it depends on the it depends on the circumstances in which it doesn't go ahead. So, but it is possible that the city would be required to purchase the land as well as the rest of the work in certain circumstances.
Okay. And what's the actual cost of this road without the purchase of the land?
We haven't got an evaluation for the actual land required for the road.
No, I'm talking about the cost of the road.
Well, the road is estimated, the total cost of the road has been estimated at $5 million. That hasn't changed from the previous report. There hasn't been any further work done on design, etc. in relation to that.
And is it likely that the cost of the road is going to exceed $5 million? I'm just talking about the cost of the road now. Is that likely to exceed $5 million?
I can't say if it's likely or not. It is possible, but I can't really sort of say that it's likely that it will. That would depend on a lot of different factors.
Okay, so the motion is that council basically council agrees to go ahead with this road without any guarantee that it's going to, that in fact it might have to purchase the land. We don't know how much the road's going to cost, and that that with all these unknowns, this road gets built. Is that pretty much what this
Mr. Gatton?
I wouldn't put it quite like that. There is an estimate for the cost of the road.
Estimate,
but there is the possibility that if the subdivision doesn't go ahead, the developer wouldn't put money into it. I can't give you any. I won't sort of stand up here and give you any likelihood or not of that occurring.
Yeah, they're unknowns then. So it's unknown as to whether we'll get the land seeded or if we have to purchase it. It's unknown as to whether it's $5 million or not for the cost of the road. So, okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, I know it's a bit unusual, but I represent the landowners. Could I make a comment?
Yeah, I didn't see you over there, but yeah, I think it's...
I've been sitting here waiting to discuss this. May I my name is Richard Atkins, I work for Macrae Investments, which owns the land in conjunction with the parks. And we've been working on this for a very, very long time. We're currently waiting on a subdivision approval from the WAPC. If we get that subdivision approval and it's satisfactory, we will cede the land to the city at no cost. That's always been the deal. Now, if we don't get a subdivision approval that is satisfactory, we don't have a development, and no, we won't be going ahead with the development. It'll stay as a cattle farm. However, if we get a subdivision approval, and for some commercial reason we decide not to go ahead, we're still going to cede the land to the city at no cost. Okay? So that is very clear. The only scenario where we're looking for payment is if we don't get a subdivision approval, there'd be a normal resumption of land situation and the city would, yes, buy the land from us to construct the road at your cost.
And have you actually indicated how much you'd want the city to purchase that land for at this stage?
No, we haven't, because it's not a scenario we're particularly envisaging.
Well, so you can see my point. There's so many unknowns. It's just not clear enough that just as to how this is actually going to end up playing out.
Well, that scenario will play out in the next month or so. We'll be at the SPC to get our approval, and if we don't get an approval, yes, that deal that's on the table disappears, and then we'll move forward and say, well, if the city wants to buy the land, we'll negotiate. But it's a condition precedent of that deal that we're documenting now that
the subdivision approval is received.
So you're saying then, by this time next month, or by the next meeting of council, you will know whether you've got your subdivision through or not?
If the SPC give us the decision in September, is the time frames that we're looking at now,
right,
so reasonably soon.
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? Because we don't. We can at least get rid of one unknown.
Yeah, but the deal that's been on the table is subject to getting that approval. So it's a moot point whether we get approval.
Well, not really, because it might be a whole different.
Councillors, you wouldn't be able to bring it back to council till November because we're in caretaker bribe.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'll be withdrawing that then.
Question through you then to Mr. Coaten. Is there a need to press on with this at this stage in time? If we do defer and we can't bring it back until after the caretaker period, so is there a need to press this now?
That is correct. Under the caretaker provisions, we won't be able to come back to November. There is urgency in it because of the bushfire risk, so there is presumably a need to get this road built as soon as we can. So the sooner some of these decisions are made, the faster it will be until the road is constructed. So this will be one less thing that will be out of the way in terms of the critical path for the project.
Okay, so if all of the approvals went ahead as what's suggested by the gentleman, and then we move on to construction, how long will it take to construct the road?
A couple of years.
Yeah, we have been talking about the developers getting the contractor to organise that. I know they were, Mr Atkins and his associates were saying that, you know, hopefully, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr Atkins, being on site for some geotechnical testing and preliminary work in January of next year, and the construction would follow through from that.
Councillor Johnson.
Seems like we're not that far away from Mark.
My question's been answered because I just wanted to know when the OEPC were likely to approve the subdivision.
Any other questions, Councillor Zahn? Councillor Lucas.
So, other than the caretaker provision, Mr. CEO or Mr. Coaten, is there any detriment to the city other than you say the bushfire hazard? But we're looking at it from it's almost September now. If it comes to the November meeting, you're talking about 8 weeks, realistically. Is there something underlying that councillors aren't aware of as to why this couldn't be deferred? And then we can go forward with certainty once we know. And look, I know one of the owners up there, and they've been trying for 20 years to get this subdivision approved. And the reason we have to put that second access road in is because the Minister of the day approved the Shady Hill subdivision against council recommendation because we knew there was only one road in and one road out. So it's unfortunately playing catch up, but the state government's also contributing 2.1 million. But unless there's some compelling reason, I don't see why we couldn't defer this till November, so we can go forward with certainty.
Yes, Johnson, you've got another question.
I've got a question about the caretaker provisions. My understanding is that one decision of council can't just prevent another decision of council taking place. So if we wanted to defer it until September, we could. All we've got is a policy. There's no actual statute that prevents us from doing that. So it's not something we have to do. If we think September is an appropriate date to defer it to, we can do so. We can just ignore the
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I mean, my understanding is that it's a significant financial decision, and therefore the caretaker provisions would apply, and you wouldn't be able to make that decision during September, and it would be best to deal with it in November.
Just to question that, so are those caretaker provisions part of the Local Government Act? Is it statute law? It's not. It's just another decision of council, so therefore it can be ignored. And any decision we make here can override any previous decision. That's the fundamental principle of the Westminster law system. So no, we don't need to be concerned about that. If we think September is a good date to defer it to, we can do that. Thank you.
Decision you can make.
Any other questions on that one, Councillor? Okay, 5.2, upgrade to the intersection of Queens and Great Eastern Highway. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, I've got a question for Mr. Carlton. Just before I do this, just bring to Council's attention dot point 3 on page 627. 127 responses were received, which is a huge number. 76 were objections. I guess, Mr. Carlton, the question here is, now that we've crystallised what we're going to do, previously it was options and discussion about various things, now it's we're putting in 2 lanes and it's all about trucks. But it appears that the objections are all about saying that the difficulty here is turning right onto the Great Eastern Highway from Queen's Road, and having a car to your left or a vehicle to your left when you're trying to turn right is actually going to make the situation worse. So this could cause a problem. So I'm sitting here thinking, here we've got apparently a solution to a problem, but everybody's objecting to the solution. So where do we go from here? Because I don't think the community living in South Guildford would like this at all.
Mr. Caton.
Certainly, turning right is a problem. And there were a lot of objections to it, but a lot of the objections were relating to this not being the best solution being a roundabout or traffic signals, and a roundabout and traffic signals aren't practical, and main roads won't approve them in this situation. So the essential options are do this or do nothing. And it's certainly not, this isn't a perfect solution, but turning right will still be a problem. But what the benefit will be when people are, and sightlines will be maintained, there'll be appropriate sightlines in place for people making that turn. But what happens at the moment is that people who are turning left have to queue up and wait for a long time behind the people who are turning right because they can't get past them to turn left. So this will improve the left turn movement at that intersection, so it will be an improvement. It certainly won't be perfect, but the options are do this or do nothing.
Well, I guess the question is doing this going to make turning right more dangerous?
I don't think it would make it more dangerous, no.
Councillor Scanlon, you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Croton, I'd just like to ask you to comment on the installation of local traffic only signs. I know we've spoken about this in the past, but we need to do something about this intersection.
Mr. Caton.
Well, as of right, vehicles can drive down there. We can't restrict who goes there and who doesn't go there. And as I've said before, and I've said in this chamber as well, I think from memory, when people who know that area well, if they're making that right turn onto Great Eastern Highway, a lot of them will go down to the lights and come out at Kalamunda Road where there's traffic signals and make that right turn. But we can't restrict. Yeah, it's as of right, vehicles can go down there, so we can't control who. It's a road, so whoever.
Okay. So we don't have the right to put up a local traffic only sign.
No, that would be a main roads regulatory sign, which.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Further question?
Just a further question, Mr. Mayor. So I beg Council's indulgence in this because it's been a running hot topic the whole 6 years I've been on council, and long before I knew about this problem, long before I was ever a councillor. Is it a reasonable thing to write yet again to main roads and ask them to put a signalised intersection here? Because I think the general view of the community is that's the only thing that's going to work to make this intersection safe. Is it reasonable to try that one more time?
Mr. Caton?
I can be certain of what answer you would get. It wouldn't be approved. Well, all it will do will just be to defer this project, and we are, as per the previous resolution of council, we are progressing this. We are negotiating with the landowner for land. There's things being put in place for that, so I don't believe that would be a sensible course of action.
Yes, Councillor Scanlon.
Sorry, if you indulge me for a moment, I'd just like to ask Mr. Croton, what is the restriction on putting a roundabout there? What is the reason why we can't have a roundabout?
Mr. Caton?
Well, it's on Great Eastern Highway, which is under the care and control of Main Road, so it's actually a main road. So any treatment there requires Main Road's approval. They've indicated that they won't approve a roundabout at that location. If a roundabout was constructed, it would require a lot of land to be purchased and a lot of services to be relocated. It would be quite expensive, and the road on the other side, which I think is Bridge Street from memory,
Yeah.
it would be very difficult to incorporate that into the roundabout as well. So that would perhaps have to be modified somehow or cul-de-saced with traffic going the other way. So, but the main reason is Main Roads have indicated that they won't support a roundabout, but physically it could be constructed, but it would just be a very expensive one.
And sorry, can I just clarify that, because in the report it says that Main Roads will not contribute to the financial cost of a roundabout or traffic lights. So if the city wanted to put in a roundabout or traffic lights, we would have to fund it?
No, we would require their approval as well, and they have we have asked that specific question, will you approve a roundabout and traffic signals? And we've asked it on several occasions and they've advised us that they won't.
Thank you.
Question.
Yeah.
Question, Councillor Lucas.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Jim, I don't know if you can answer this one because it may go into acquisition costs, but there's been a lot of objection. I've heard a comment that is it really worth it? And I'm looking at the bottom line. It's a $1.2 million construction and land acquisition, but I suppose you can't advise me how much the land acquisition part would be because that would be confidential.
Yeah, that's right. I can advise you if you wanted to go behind closed doors, but suffice to say that will come to a future council meeting as a confidential item, subject to depending on what happens tonight or next Wednesday.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to say I'll have to do an alternate motion on this one, Mr Mayor, because I don't think the solution would meet community expectations with 76 objections.
So it'll be a refusal, is it? You had another question, Councillor Colley?
I was just wondering if the Main Roads, in your opinion, Jim, would accept some chicanes on Great Eastern Highway.
I don't know if you're winding me up there, Councillor Kiley, but they wouldn't, no.
Okay, thank you.
Was that dangerous? Okay, Councillors, 5.3, the Guildford parking time change restrictions. Councillor Scanlon.
Yes, I'd like to ask through you to the staff if we could have some clarification on the terminology where it says the reduced restriction extents on Terrace Road. What does that mean?
Mr Caton.
I'm not sure exactly which page you're referring to, but I believe that is originally restricted parking was proposed in the consultation that we did. Restricted parking was proposed all the way along Terrace Road in terms of the timing limits, but it's not proposed to have time limits along that section now.
Along any of Terrace Road?
Well, there will be some if you have a look at page 657. So there will be some at the bottom end down near the intersection with Swan Street, but there won't be. It won't be sort of further to the northeast. If you have page 657, 658, 659 shows the extent of the parking on Terrace Road.
Thank you, and I'll be submitting an alternative
to
the to 5.3.
You want to amend it? Is that what you want to do it? I assume.
Yes, I'd like to amend the officer's recommendation. Correct.
Yes, Councillor Lucas.
Thank you. Mr Coaten, on page 657, which we were just referring to, where you have the roundabout at Swan Street and you have that red rectangular shape, you'll notice at the top of that red rectangular shape is a red car park. Can I ask why that can't be a parking bay where the car's actually parked? It's currently not a parking bay, but there is sufficient room for a car to park there. It says nothing.
Yeah, I'll have to take that on notice.
I just want to provide an extra parking space outside a busy cafe.
Mr Mayor, if I may, I've asked that question of staff before and received the response that it's too close to the roundabout and legally we can't put a parking space there.
Okay. I want to know why, because cars park there all the time, like that red car.
Yeah, it says no parking.
And there's no line on the ground to say you've got to be parked between these two lines?
Question?
Question, Councillor Coley.
On page 653 in front of post A, I don't have an objection to providing parking there. I'm just concerned with the proximity of the parking bay to the corner and what the regulations state in that regard, because I think that could be extending. I'm not too sure what the regulations are in relation to that, that's all.
Mr. Coates?
So, sorry, you're talking about the corner of Meadow Street and Sterling Street. Correct. The last parking bay there.
Correct.
Is that
on the lower part of the page?
Yeah. All right. Yep. I'll take that on notice.
Yep. Right. Anything else, no one, councillors? Councillor Scannell's indicated to withdraw it. So 5.4 is the proposed permanent road closure portion of Teal Mews Ballajura. List of accounts paid. 6.2 is the interim financial manager report.
Yeah, some questions on that if I could.
Yes, Councillor Coley.
Through you, Mayor, I'm interested, or draw Council's attention to, well, first of all, on page 711, we seem to have some considerable variances in the expected income, statement of comprehensive income, greater than revised by 8.7 million. I'm sure there's an explanation for it, but do you mind just giving us a brief overview of why there were such considerable variances?
Ms. Leigh?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there is a variation in the rates collected, which would be due to the interims that are charged, and there is also a positive variation in operating grants, subsidies and contributions. And that is the major breakdown of the variation.
And that grants would come into statement of comprehensive income, is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Just a further question. I'm looking for the CEO's advice here because I note that we only have to note the report, but I'm interested in how we deal with sundry debtors on page 747 and our ability, or what I'm basically asking on page 747 what we're planning to do about the $750,000 in sundry debts owing beyond 90 days. In particular, the number one debtor owing $127,700, how long that's been owing for, what are we doing about getting that money back, and are we looking to pursue, under the Local Government Act, can we look at repossessing land, selling the land to get that debt back? I'm not too sure who it is or what it relates to, but I'm just concerned that we've got a considerable amount of sundry debts there, and I just want to know what we intend to do about it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, these considerable debts are actually referred to FIR, which is Fines Enforcement Registry, and they undertake the action to assist with the recovery of those funds, and they are monitored on a regular basis. But I would have to take on notice what the top debtor actually relates to.
Just one further question. Is it possible under the Local Government Act to pursue these debtors the same way as we pursue people who are in rates arrears for more than a certain time?
Mr. Mayor, there's very specific legislation around how you can recover rates debtors because rates are a charge on the land. That's why there are those provisions which can lead council to sell property. So that is very specific and just focused on rates. I will provide more information about the avenues we can undertake for sundry debtors.
Thank you. Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wish councillors to refer to page 715 in regards to the changes of the ratio 5.18 to 1.88 in regards to the current ratio. Was that decided by internal stakeholders like yourself, Ms Leahy, or was that given to advice by external auditors or by external personnel or consultants in regards to the dramatic change from 5.18 to 1.88?
Can I just
page 715, statement of financial position.
Second one down. Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms Leigh?
Through you, Mr Mayor, this is in consultation with the city's auditors, where we've had to reclassify some of our borrowings. That's actually listed here in the summary on page 715. So it's a reclassification of borrowings under current liabilities. So that is through consultation with the Auditor General's auditors.
Is that in regards to long-term loans or short-term loans, or is it a provision increase, or what is it? Because current liability is a very loose definition.
It is in relation to those which we have to recognise as longer than 1 year have moved.
No other further questions, Alan? Is now, we've got 6.3, which is the change of basis evaluation. No. 7.1, review of advisory groups. 7.2, review of committees of council. Councillor Congan was already withdrawn. Then we're into the notices of motion, and then, councillors, we're going to deal with the confidentials, so if there's any questions, I need to go behind closed doors for those. Sorry? A confidential item? Yes. Which would... No worries, which one? 3.3 for alternate? Okay, is there anyone got any questions on any of the confidentials?
Yeah, I do actually.
Okay, well, if that's the case, we need to go behind closed doors. Thank you.